4 minutes after 10, everyone's a critic. Helen's been in touch already to say, why does one have to be worse than the other? They're both as bleeping bad as bleeping. Hang on, let me get this right. They are both bleeping bleeps. Pardon my Cummings. She says, that we could add that to the national vocabulary, couldn't we? You get caught swearing. You say, oh, pardon my Cummings. We used to say, pardon my French. Pardon my Cummings. Good Lord. I'm a fan of creative swearing. I know that makes me childish, but I am. I'm both childish and a fan of creative swearing. And some of the phrases that he deployed in the WhatsApp messages he was exchanging while the country was facing a global pandemic of unprecedented proportion were quite breathtaking in their imagination. Unfortunately, we can't repeat any of them on the radio. It's 5 after 10. We're going to dive straight into the COVID inquiry. A few elements of it, but chiefly there's a sort of curious dichotomy emerging now. As I told you would happen, the coverage can't be honest. The people that brought you Brexit, Boris Johnson, to a lesser extent Liz Truss, and the people who told you in the media, I'm speaking chiefly, but also the Conservative Party, the people who told you that Boris Johnson was doing a bang-up job, the people who told you that Boris Johnson got all the big calls right, the people who told you that he was working really hard. Do you know that there was actually a front page of The Sun when Boris Johnson himself was diagnosed with COVID-19. This was sent to me today by a pal of mine called Andy, who I'm seeing tonight, actually, at my Bath show. And I thought I had to double-check he hadn't photoshopped it, because he's quite good technologically. But he hadn't. And the actual front page of the actual Sun newspaper at that time was, he stayed at work for you. Now pray at home for him. And we've learnt from his closest colleagues and confidants he wasn't even at work. He was uncontactable for huge swathes of the most significant period of time because he was apparently worried about missing a deadline for some book he was writing, or just not engaged, or according to Lord Bethel, a bloke that he put into government himself, so we can describe him as a close colleague or confidant, he was too busy trying to deal with the fallout from the Brexit that he told everybody would be brilliant. What would you do, seriously, if you'd spent 10, 15 years blowing smoke up his backside, telling everybody he was the Messiah, telling everybody he was brilliant, tickling his tummy if he turned up for an interview at your newspaper or your studio? What would you just look the other way? Would you pretend it wasn't happening, or would you focus entirely upon how awful Dominic Cummings is? I think I'd do the latter. I think if I was completely compromised professionally on Boris Johnson, because it was obvious to anybody paying attention how awful he was, so anybody pretending otherwise was misleading their readers, I think I'd focus entirely on Dominic Cummings, which explains why some front pages today do precisely that. Cummings fed toxic misogynist culture in number 10. So as a newspaper that would normally be fairly committed to the idea that the buck stops with the boss, not with the butler. Other newspapers follow similar suit, but you can fill in the gaps yourself. I think we'll do things a little differently today, with your permission. Henry Riley is with me because I was off air, really, before Cummings concluded his testimony, and it seems timely, I think, to look back over it. I reserve the right, as always, to completely change my mind about what question I'll ask you at the end of it, after we've heard Henry's roundup. But at the moment, I am drawn to who you personally have the biggest problem with. Dominic Cummings, who, of course, created an environment in which the pool from which the government would be picked had, by definition, to be idiots. You could only get into the cabinet if you were an idiot, because you could only get into the cabinet if you were either persuaded or prepared to pretend that Brexit was a good idea. Yeah, the David Gauks, the Dominic Greaves, the Anna Soubrys, the Nicholas Soames, the Rory Stewarts, whichever you want to pick, they'd all been sent packing, because unless you were prepared to sign up to the delusional cult of Brexit and later Boris Johnson, there was no job for you. People like Liz Truss had to undergo reverse ferrets and pronounce the polar opposite of what they'd professed just months previously. People like Jeremy Hunt had to sell what was left of their soul to retain positions of power. So that what you might call the talent puddle from which the government would be picked was so shallow that I doubt you could moisten a Rizla paper with the amount of fluid it contained. That was on Cummings. And then he spends his life complaining about how awful everybody is. I mean, just bizarre. Anyway, where do we start, Henry?
Well, Dominic Cummings, I think, is probably a good place, as you referenced. His name sort of scarcely be mentioned around Westminster, but he chose Halloween to re-emerge.
He didn't choose Halloween.
Well, he didn't choose Halloween. Halloween chose him as the ghost-like figure to sort of re-emerge and put his head above the parapet once again. Now, as you referenced, James, a lot of strong things to say. Some things we can play, some things we can't. Firstly, this was some of the frank things he had to say on certain government departments.
The Cabinet Office was a bomb site. And we had a huge problem of quality control of documents going into meetings and inconsistent data, inconsistent facts being read out. And many officials have come to me and said, this is causing chaos. There has to be some a formalised system to actually grip this, because the Cabinet Office was a dumpster fire.
Now, describing the Cabinet Office as a dumpster fire, the office actually got off quite lightly, I think, when you hear about how Mr Cummings described many of his colleagues.
Due in large part to your own WhatsApps, Mr Cummings, we're going to have to coarsen our language somewhat.
I apologise.
You called ministers useless pigs, morons, in emails and WhatsApps to your professional colleagues.
Now, Dominic Cummings was in Downing Street for 16 months or so, of course, a crucial period of that time being in 2020 during the early period of the pandemic. Now, no particular secret that Dominic Cummings, when it comes to Boris Johnson, has some pretty frank things to say now he's no longer working with the now former Prime Minister. But he did admit he helped put Mr Johnson in power despite deeming him unfit for office.
You said we were having meetings in Number 10. By the summer, either we'll all have gone from here, or we will be in the process of trying to get rid of him and get someone else in as Prime Minister. Did you say that?
Yeah.
So you helped to put into power and to sustain someone who was, in your view, and I emphasise it's your view, the inquiry's reached no view, somebody who was unfit to respond to the extraordinary difficult demands of a pandemic.
Correct.
Are you sorry?
No, because I think that you have to, politics is about choices. And the choice that we had in summer 2019 was, do we allow the whole situation, this one-century constitutional crisis to continue, melt down, and possibly see Jeremy Corbyn as PM and a second referendum on Brexit, which we thought would be catastrophic for the country and for democracy, for faith in democracy, or to roll the dice on Boris and to try and control them?
I'll just pause there, because the idea of a second referendum being disastrous for democracy is pretty close to an admission that they'd have lost it.
It does seem interesting, doesn't it, that he viewed that as the only avenue by which to actually sustain Brexit going through.
Probably true. I think that probably was the best way, not necessarily the only way. And of course, people on the other side of the political divide who ensured that the battle would be between the unelectable and the unconscionable will probably never take responsibility for their actions either, but on we go.
Well, if you thought Dominic Cummings' comments on Boris Johnson were a little harsh, they seemed actually quite nice compared with his view on Matt Hancock.
I also must stress, I think leaving Hancock in post is a big mistake. He's a proven liar who nobody believes or should believe on anything. And we face going into autumn crisis with the still in charge of the NHS, still, therefore we'll be back around that cabinet table with him and Stevens again in September. Hideous prospect.
Then, of course, Dominic Cummings was challenged on the famous, or infamous, I should say, Barnard Castle incident, where Dominic Cummings claimed he went on a short trip, 30 miles, to test his eyesight. Interestingly, he had apologised for how he and other officials in Downing Street had handled proceedings, but when it came to Barnard Castle, he claims still that he did nothing wrong.
Do you accept that that apparent breach of the rules caused enormous offence and pain to the people in this country whose loved ones were dying?
No, I think we're talking about two different things. I think the handling of it was a disaster and caused huge trouble and huge pain to a lot of people. And I very much regret and have already apologised for how badly Number 10 handled the whole thing. But in terms of my actual actions in going north and then coming back down, I acted entirely reasonably and legally and did not break any rules.
James, currently Helen McNamara is in front of the committee. She used to be the Deputy Cabinet Secretary. She was actually brought up yesterday by Dominic Cummings, again in far from glowing terms.
If I have to come back to Helen's bullshit with PET, was that propriety and ethics?
Yes.
Part of the Cabinet Office, or Number 10? Designed to waste huge amounts of my time so I can't spend it on other stuff, I'll personally handcuff her and escort her from the building. Had you got form, Mr Cummings for arranging for people to be escorted from number 10 before?
You shouldn't believe everything you read in the newspapers. That story is not accurate.
I don't care how it's done, but that woman must be out of our hair. We cannot keep dealing with this horrific meltdown of the British state while
Regards to Helen McNamara were then continually read out with the
We're
council.
just sailing quite close to the wind on the bleeps here, Henry.
I thought they were.
Okay.
Can you make it out?
No.
Good, thank you.
Absolutely not.
Hugo Keith, the counsel to the inquiry, then alleged that Mr. Cummings may be somewhat of a misogynist.
You, Mr. Cummings, were the person who denigrated women. You denigrated Helen McNamara, and you sent that misogynistic message about her. Did you not?
No, that's not correct. I was not misogynistic. I was much ruder about men than I was about Helen. I agree that my language is deplorable, but as you can see for yourself, I deployed the same or worse language about the Prime Minister, Secretary of State and other people.
It's such a glorious defence, isn't it? I'm not misogynistic, so I was even more vile and foul-mouthed about men. Also, I think, the producer took an executive decision to dump that. So if there was a little glitch in the last clip of Dominic Cummings, it's because Henry Riley's technique with the bleep is in need of a little bit of work. Are you still using razor blades?
I thought I'd cut it quite finely, actually, maybe too finely in hindsight.
Is that the lot?
Well, that's it. I mean, Helen McNamara she presumably will respond to some of those accusations that Dominic Cummings levied at her yesterday. She's in front of the inquiry today. And then at some point as well, Stuart Glassborough, who was another figure in Downing Street, the Deputy Principal Private Secretary.
And at what point do the key players, the politicians, appear? Do we know?
So it looks like December. So that is the date we've been given. Happy Christmas. It looks like Rishi Sunak, from what I hear, will be the 11th of December. Boris Johnson later that month, and also very likely that the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, will be appearing before Baroness Hallett and the inquiry that month as well.
Remember the 11th of December. I mean, on we go. It's curious and ridiculous and terrible in equal measure. Forgive me for not knowing this. I think I know the answer to this question, but the WhatsApps of Johnson and Sunak are still missing in action, are they?
Yes, some of them are, because there was the issue with the phone of Rishi Sunak.
So, but when you say some of them, the ones that we've got are the ones that are on other people's phones as replies or interactions. The ones that are on their own phones.
So some of Boris Johnson's WhatsApps have been handed over to the inquiry on his old phone.
Right.
On his new phone. But on that old phone, there is still an issue with some of those WhatsApps. But as you say, a lot of the sort of juicy ones we're hearing in the early stages, we are only hearing because they have been messages from Simon Case.
I wonder why more is not being made of that. Do you think it will be perhaps when they appear? I mean, certainly when Hugo Keith has the bit between his teeth, you could imagine him being particularly interested in the reason why these two people, out of everybody involved in this entire saga, are the only ones who haven't produced their phones.
Far be it from me to say, but I wouldn't like to be in their position being questioned by Hugo Keith in December.
We shall see. Thank you, Henry. Great job, as ever. Just a little bit of work on the bleeps, if you would. I don't know what question I'm going to ask you after this, but I think I might ask you about Dominic Cummings rather than Boris Johnson, actually. I think just saying who's worse is a bit lazy. I can do better than that. You deserve better than that. But do you feel sorry for him? 0345 6060 973. It is 21 minutes after 10, and I mean, there's so much stuff that we will almost certainly miss some of it. There were concerns, according to Dominic Cummings, about the prospect of Boris Johnson funneling money to Evgeny Lebedev via George Osborne. I mean, concerns are not, concrete facts, but the amount of money that was funneled towards billionaire newspaper owners was considerable, and these meetings with Evgeny Lebedev were mysterious, and George Osborne was editor of the Evening Standard, and we learnt last week about the pressure being put upon the government to lift lockdowns by newspapers because newspaper owners were worried about the effect that the lockdowns were having on their sales. Why did you cut out the bit in Dominic Cummings' testimony where he explained the security threats at his house before driving north? Because we're covering his testimony on the questions of how the government handled the pandemic so badly, and a little bit on him saying he didn't break any rules on Barnard Castle seemed fitting, but the rest of it's completely irrelevant to the conversation that we're having on this programme. So it's Idiot's Corner for you this morning. And it might be Idiot's Corner for me. All right? That would be a first. I don't feel sorry for him. Right? And I don't think I certainly don't admire him. But in the specific context, and you have to do something I find very hard to do, you have to leave Brexit at the door, right? You have to leave the fact that he ran Vote Leave and essentially masterminded Boris Johnson's passage into Downing Street, and then crucially was the architect of most of the massive lies that delivered that big majority in 2019. So I know these are big buts. I like big buts, I cannot lie. I know these are big buts, right? But I need you to come with me on this. So you have to park Brexit and the 2019 election, because he is a strategist and his job is to achieve goals, and therefore, according to the criteria by which you judge the success of a strategist, he was in 2016 and 2019 an enormous success. He got Brexit over the line despite it being an exercise in complete delusion and dodginess, and he got Boris Johnson into Downing Street despite, and this isn't my opinion, it's his, despite him being supremely unfit for the highest office in the land. So much as it pains me, and probably you, we can't pretend that he wasn't very good at the job that he was given to do. Get Brexit over the line, brackets, by lying to the British people on a scale that has never been seen before, close brackets, and get Boris Johnson into Downing Street with a big majority, brackets, by lying to the British people on a scale that hasn't been seen since that referendum campaign you ran back in 2016, close brackets. But on both occasions, mission accomplished. Okay? Mission accomplished. So he is in Downing Street, and he is at the centre of power. He is arguably the most powerful person in the country simply by dint of turning up for work, because Boris Johnson, who on paper would be more powerful, we learn, in fact we already knew, often didn't. Couldn't be bothered to chair Cobra meetings, couldn't be contacted in the early days of the breakout, according to Lord Bethell, not me. According to Lord Bethell, he was too busy dealing with the fallout of Brexit and focusing on other issues. He just didn't like it at all. Complicated, heavy, difficult, no perfect solution, no opportunity for PR, just the polar opposite of what Boris Johnson would consider, what we would consider to be his comfort zone. So Cummings is there, right in the thick of it. And the frustration he felt at the incompetence of the people around him seems to me to be really remarkable. Now, this is the bit where I wonder whether you can leave Brexit at the door, because, as I've pointed out already, the talent puddle from which the government had to be selected had been denuded of all talent, competence and integrity by the necessity of chucking everybody who was prepared to tell the truth about Brexit out of the party. Or, in the case of Liz Truss and Jeremy Hunt, just get them to sit on their hands, press rewind and pretend they'd never told the truth in the first place. So I don't know how significant that... Oh, and Hancock as well. Crikey, you always forget about him being a Remainer. So that's the tricky bit. That's the bit that's hardest to leave at the door. But I don't think I'm saying that Cummings is excellent at being totally amoral, Ron, but I fully accept the possibility that I might be. But it doesn't change the fact that he's excellent at it. And it is largely immoral behaviour, but we're talking about politics. So what's the question I'm trying to ask you, do you think? Is it do you feel sorry for him? Are you warming? I wonder if I need your help to remind myself why we shouldn't allow any sort of reputational rehabilitation of Dominic Cummings. Shall I get the phone lines open? 0345 6060 973. Specifically in the context of COVID response, COVID leadership, is Dominic Cummings emerging with rather more credit than anybody else? There it is. Because that doesn't mean I have to praise him. I'm just saying he's not as bad as everybody else, and everybody else is blooming awful. So is Dominic Cummings actually improving his reputation as this inquiry continues, or not? Possibly you might want to give my head a wobble this morning, although you don't have the right to put me in idiot's corner, I'm afraid. The management's decision is final on that, and I am the management. 0345 6060 973. It seems to me, and I know that it's easy to conclude this from his testimony, it seems to me that Dominic Cummings was the only person in the building telling the truth. Discuss. Sarah is in Liverpool. Sarah, what's it going to be?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Sarah.
Well, I have to admit, I am no fan of Dominic Cummings for all the reasons you said before. These are typical strategist, disruptionist, and over a certain thing which we shall not mention.
No, not especially if Henry's in charge of the bleeps. We have to keep a very close eye on
he is a born liar.
Who, Cummings?
Well, not over that other thing which we are not allowed, which we will not mention.
No, you can't do that. You have to mention Johnson if that's it.
Well, Johnson, yeah.
Yeah, no, he's not a liar in the way that Johnson is a liar.
Yeah, but he's an arch manipulator, which is what you expect from a political strategist anyway.
Yeah, but do you know what? The thing is, he believed in the goal. He believed, right, that the end justified the means. So he saw getting out of Europe and you know, rebuilding whatever we were left with as such an important priority, such a glorious Camelot to head towards, that he managed, I think, to turn off any moral concerns, or because he thought that the end justified the means, and not for selfish reasons. And he might be bonkers, but he honestly thought he could rebuild Jerusalem, and to do that, first it had to be razed to the ground.
It did, and the thing is, after that damage, it would take decades. But getting back to COVID,
yes.
Let's be perfectly honest. Although I am slightly warming to him.
Yeah.
I will admit, just on the COVID testimony alone of what actually went on in number 10. And let's be perfectly honest, he suddenly realised that Boris was the monster to his Dr. Frankenstein. And he's gone, oh dear, what have I done? Yeah. I mean, this is, putting it in the... No,
I like it.
Context. He is basically...
So he would have thought, it doesn't matter that Johnson's an absolute liability, because... you know, we can deal with, if it was normal politics, we can deal with it. We can just send him out to do a lap of honour and have a slice of cake and make some silly speech and pat children on the head and be nice to little old ladies and keep the Daily Mail sweet and the Telegraph. But they won't. The actual business of government, I'll take care of. And then a pandemic came along and all bets were off.
That was it. And the thing is, it revealed everything that Boris is.
It's almost like a Greek tragedy.
More than that.
Yeah.
I'd say it's on some serious steroids. We've been left with it.
So, because he's watching his own hamartia or his own hubris in human form, Boris Johnson, who he put in power, and he's watching Boris Johnson's epic unfitness.
That's
for
it.
Power.
And he turned around and he was saying, oh yes, everything's going to be all right. And anyone who'd been watching what was going on in China even before Christmas would have gone, the bits before Christmas.
Yeah,
I remember seeing all the stuff, because I used to, before I got ill, I was a medical researcher, so I've had quite a few friends who were in the business, and also, even though I'm ill, I still keep up with what was going on, and I thought, we're up for trouble in a minute, if we don't get our act together on this. Yes. And the fact that Boris and company went out of the way and destroyed the regional public health system that we had in this country, had been set up since Spanish flu, roughly. They destroyed it. So all of that went out the window. All of that knowledge, all of that, bye-bye. Then Boris decided, when all this started to come up, bubble up around about Christmas, New Year time, 2019. Anybody else, any decent Prime Minister with a moral compass would have gone, hey up, we're going to have a problem on our hands. And sure enough, what did Boris do? Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. It's quite remarkable.
Good. Another party. Oh, yes, well, I'm going off on holiday. I'm doing this.
You're running me right through the news. So you are, if your needle was nudged, it is being nudged towards Dominic Cummings?
A little bit.
Much to your own surprise?
Much to my own surprise.
Yeah,
I am nudged towards. But the thing is, what Dominic Cummings should have realised is that Boris has not got 1 ounce of humanity.
Yeah, but he did realise that. That's the bit that we can dig into a little further after the news. He did know that. That's the mad bit. That's the Greek tragedy bit. That's the thing where he thought, well, look, I know it's terrible, but I think we can get away. I think I'm so special. I can steer this wonky shopping trolley in a way that nobody else would be able to do. And do you know, one of the many ridiculous people to pop up during these terrible, terrible years of British history, Gitto Harry, who was a sort of advisor or something like that, he even gave an interview yesterday saying it's not Boris's fault, it's the fault of the people around him for not managing him better, which makes him sound like an incontinent toddler. It's 10:33. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. 10:37 is the time. Forgive the self-reference, but I wonder whether 2023 me needs a talking to from 2021 me. Because I wrote this in 2021 about Dominic Cummings, expressing his dismay at Boris Johnson and revealing, and on this occasion, revealing that he asked Cummings if he thought it would be okay if he spent a lot of time writing my Shakespeare book. So this is the exchange that Cummings reported in November 2 years ago. Dom, I want to run something by you. Do you think it's okay if I spend a lot of time writing my Shakespeare book? What do you mean? This chuffing divorce, it's very expensive, and this job, it's like getting up every morning pulling a 747 down the runway. I love writing, I love it, I want to write my Shakespeare book. And Cummings said, I think people expect you to be doing the Prime Minister's job. I wouldn't want to talk to people about this. I wouldn't talk to people about this if I were you. So that's within a month of the election. Cummings reveals he was bored with being Prime Minister. And of course, this was at the point where, as Sarah just reminded us, we were getting an indication from elsewhere in the world of what COVID-19 was likely to look like when it arrived here. So I'm sitting here listening to, watching, digesting his testimony yesterday and thinking he was the only one in the building who seemed to fully appreciate A, the urgency of the situation, and B, the awfulness of the regime in place to deal with it. And yet 2 years ago, I was absolutely clear that he was an arsonist clutching his pearls at the destructive power of the fire that he had started, adding it's as bizarre as it is pathetic. Which one was right? 2023 me or 2021 me? Or both? Neither? Neither would be good. 10:39 is the time. Couple of phone lines free if you're quick. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. I'm getting quite a lot of this. Frustratingly, says Matt, I also warmed to him yesterday as well, until the part when he said he didn't regret it, and then I remembered that he single-handedly ruined my life. I just think that bleeps with terrible language, because it reminds me of all my friends who I can't afford to see anymore thanks to him. Oh, Matt, I'm sorry, man. And this from my mate Scott, who may not thank me for reading it out. He says, I just can't help but like him, but don't tell anyone I said that. Jazz is in Uxbridge. Jazz, what would you like to say?
Hey, man. How's it going?
I'm good. What's on your mind?
You know what, I was talking about this earlier, and while I believe the buck stops with Johnson, you know, he was in the Prime Minister's seat, I don't think he's so incompetent as to not understand the position he is in.
Who, Johnson?
Yeah, Johnson.
I'm not going to have a row with you, but I disagree. I don't think his brain works like yours. Listen, that's January 2020, and we're in the position of having to take Chummo's word for it, Cummings' word for it, but I find it perfectly plausible that in January he was asking his key advisor if he could just take his foot off the gas a bit and concentrate on writing his book about Shakespeare, because he doesn't have the kind of brain that understands words like responsibility, accountability, duty. He just doesn't. I mean, his teachers at Eton were saying that about him when he was 15, and his closest colleagues are saying that about him in 2023. So anyway, it's not the point of your call. I don't agree with it.
No, that's okay.
Thanks.
But even with Dominic Cummings, to have got him into power, like, I feel no sympathy for that man.
No, I didn't say sympathy.
Or I'm not even warming to him.
No, I mean, compared to the least bad person the least bad bozo in the building.
Is he like
I
how
don't know.
much weight do we give to a man who elected someone he thought was fundamentally unfit for the highest office in the land?
But
and
this
then
is
shot
where
when he can't do the job.
Yeah, no, I grant you that. But two things, right? Number one, he had no idea that the job would be this difficult because the pandemic was, came out of the blue. And number two, and number two, to go back to your first point, the end justified the means. He had to get Boris Johnson into Downing Street in order to undertake his lifetime project of rebuilding British government from the ground up. I mean, this is what his endless blogs are all about. He thinks he's sort of a cross between the art of war and Machiavelli's Prince. And he genuinely, I think he's as mad as a box of frogs.
Definitely.
But he genuinely believed that he had to there's a figure of speech to describe this. He had to raise everything to the ground in order to rebuild it. And that's why he did the things that he did. That doesn't make me admire him or sympathise with him, but it makes me understand him, and it makes him different from the people who acted entirely out of self-interest, self-advancement, or sociopathic contempt, to the people who lied because it got them out of trouble. He did all of the things that he did because he thought that the end justified the means.
And all we've got left is a space that's been raised to the ground.
Yes.
And he wasn't equipped to deal with COVID either. And he wasn't.
No, he would
able
say,
to,
and I can't quite believe I've cast myself in the role of Dominic Cummings' PR today. But if the cap fits, he would say that if he'd had a couple of years to get the ship in order, and then the pandemic had hit, we'd have been fine.
That sounds like something anyone would say, right?
Yeah,
I could have handled it.
I'll take that one back.
Place.
I'll take that one back. That was beneath
I think
me.
I listened to this podcast, Classical Stuff You Should Know, and one of the things they spoke about is what happens when you raise people without a moral education, and essentially you're left with clever devils. People who can work unto their own end, but really don't have any impetus to serve those around them. I want a higher standard of politician. I want a higher standard of politic in general. I'm tired of it. I've had 13 years of this Conservative government. Going to be 30. I've had them since I was 16. I've watched this country fall apart under them. It's difficult for me to afford any warmth or sympathy to a government or successive governments that have destroyed our NHS, our country, our economy, our education system. I don't have to afford these people anything while there are food banks having to ration what they give to other people.
I did try to ring fence and I know it was a bit cheeky of me, but I did try to ring fence what the inquiry is about from all the other stuff. And I know that's
I get that.
What do you do for a living, Jazz?
I'm a doctor.
I knew that. I just thought it would make a powerful moment of radio.
I appreciate that.
I appreciate you. It's coming up to 11:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. James Cummings is every bit the narcissistic, mendacious, venal operator I always thought he was. Odious, foul-mouthed, self-proclaimed disruptor, kept totally quiet throughout COVID. That could be the crucial piece of evidence for the prosecution from Peter in Solihull. He's all about saving his egotistical self. He's so brilliant he couldn't even concoct a plausible Barnard Castle story. And this from Chris in Chester. Cummings is the T-Rex showing up at the end of Jurassic Park. You're grateful for him dealing with the immediate threat at hand, Boris Raptors, but not long ago he was carving his own destructive path, and we shouldn't forget that just because we're a bit pleased to see him now. I think Chris is on course for Analogy of the Day. It's a new award that I haven't instituted before. Have I done an Analogy of the Day award? I don't think I have. I usually probably pat myself on the back for that, but I like that one. I wouldn't have thought of Jurassic Park in the context of the COVID-19 inquiry, but we take what we find. A lot of love for Jazz coming in. You're right, that was a great call, and I resisted the urge to... No, I'm going to continue to resist the urge. I'll let you fill in the gaps yourself. It's 10:45. 10:49 is the time. Frank says, James, you've lost it. Cummings is beyond defending the arrogance of the man. Well, I suppose I'm not really in a position to criticise other people for arrogance, Frank, but I'm not defending him. I'm categorically not defending him. I think he is as mad as a box of frogs. I think he's deeply dangerous. I think he's vituperative, bilious, and vile in many ways, but... if you judge him by results, he secured two of the biggest results, politically speaking, of the last 50 years. He got Boris Johnson into Downing Street with an enormous majority, not single-handedly, but he was a crucial part of that process, and he got Brexit over the line in 2016, despite it being the single stupidest thing that any country has ever voted to do to itself. I mean, just full stop. So you judge entirely by results and goals. You can't argue with that. And then you get to the Downing Street that he was in de facto charge of when the pandemic came calling, and you see from the notes at the time, remember, that he was absolutely beside himself with terror, fury, anger at how awful everybody else was. So all I'm saying was he was right about how awful everybody else was. It's quite bizarre to read the senior advisor, the chief advisor to the Prime Minister, describing the Prime Minister in terms that I was deploying at the time as a gob on a stick on the radio who's always thought, well, apart from a very brief burp in 2008, who's always been clear about how utterly, utterly awful Boris Johnson was and would always be. It's as if my monologues and Dominic Cummings' WhatsApps had children together. So to see all of this coming out of Downing Street is genuinely staggering, and he was right. Then I don't know what the word I want is. Do I say you've got to give him credit for that? What's the word I want? That's a great way to do phone-ins. What's the word I'm looking for? You've got to give Dominic Cummings bleep for the fact that he was right about what everybody else was doing, I think. Helen McNamara, who he was incredibly rude about, has just said that Boris Johnson was sitting there saying that everything was great and laughing at the Italians. I don't know, and we're going to carry on with this in the next hour, so if you're waiting to talk to me, don't worry about me going off on one. But I don't know whether we'll ever be able to do the phone-in on people who, gave their life savings to Boris Johnson. Because either there's none left, apart from the people editing the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph, who obviously, particularly at the Daily Mail, because they've hired him as a columnist now, they can't begin to even repent of their awful, awful mistake. Or you'd just never admit it, or you still aren't repenting. So if I said, how do you account for the fact that you fell for this man? You used to do loads of phone-ins on that, but I don't know now. I think the stakes are too high. We'll see. We may try. Bob's in Brighton. Bob, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Bob.
I've got 4 points basically that I'll try and get.
Did you write them down?
I did.
Fantastic. Carry on.
I'll be as quick as possible.
One.
Stop clock is right twice a day.
Yes. That's about Cummings.
Yeah, exactly. So Brexit comes. Sorry, didn't mean to use that rude word. Coronavirus comes along. Cummings sees himself as a trend spotter, a strategist. He can synthesize information as he sees it coming in. He can come up with act as a conduit to people in power. He can plan a response. He can sort of plan things ahead of time.
This is how he sees himself. This is how he sees himself.
It's how he sees himself.
Yeah, fair play.
How he made his name on Brexit.
Yeah.
And in some ways, if you look at what was coming out of China, and he must have had access to more information than we had in his privileged position in government at the end of December, he could see what was coming. So in that way, he's almost the right person at the right time.
He would think so. And we might even agree a bit if he had the right tools to deploy in pursuit of his next goal.
Exactly. Now, the thing that's making me quite upset at the moment is, and Cummings has used this tactic as well, we need to think about the context before Johnson of pandemics. So the Conservative governments have identified for several years that a pandemic was a massive risk to this country, one of the biggest risks we faced. Cameron took it so seriously that he was talking to other world leaders about it. In Theresa May's time, they decided to wargame this with that Operation Cygnus to test our readiness. And Cygnus came out and said we were woefully underprepared. Now, these are all Conservative governments. Johnson comes in, and not only does he not act on the findings of Cygnus, but he actually scrapped the Threats, Hazards, Resilience and Contingency Committee that was a national security committee 6 months before coronavirus hit.
And so Cummings did nothing to stop this.
No. In fact, one of the points I wanted to come to is Cummings a crucial kingpin in this government or not? Because he seems to be opting in and out. You know how success is many
very
parents.
Put.
Yeah, and failure is an orphan.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. It's one of my favourite figures of speech. Say it again.
Success has many parents, failure is an orphan.
Exactly.
he's choosing now. Johnson scrapped this committee so that the government could focus on Brexit.
Yes,
and this was a government geared up with one goal in mind: to get Brexit done. As part of that approach, they were throwing out evidence. They were extremely reactive to any criticism or scrutiny. You had a real challenging environment nationally that was set up. The government didn't want to be challenged on anything. And so I think the government geared to almost bulldoze through such a single vision.
Yeah. Well, they purged anyone who from their own benches who was prepared to tell the truth.
Exactly, and the right-wing media geared up against any opposition. All logical opposition was crushed, and I think that's the gearing that the right-wing media was on going into the pandemic. I think the final point I make, then, James, is sort of where I'm ending up is it's all about that last point. It's the fact that Cummings may have been in there, shocked at what he was seeing around him. Now, he was happy for this government to steamroll the evidence to carry on regardless when it was on his terms, when it was getting what he saw as his objective.
A key architect of the purge. I mean, he understood how important it was to silence people telling the truth.
Exactly.
So he can't wash his hands of how awful everything was when the pandemic came calling, because he contributed hugely to the creation of the ecosystem which Downing Street had become.
Yeah, and took away the tools that had been being built up by Conservative governments for years to deal with exactly this.
And that's that bit that's completely missing from his testimony. So, and that's where the fig leaf of, we had to stop Jeremy Corbyn and we had to stop a second referendum just begins to feel very flimsy, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. These people dismantled our pandemic preparedness and are now claiming that they could never see it coming. And it's beautiful. It makes me so angry.
I know. I can tell it does, and it makes me very angry as well. I indeed, as Tim in Norfolk has just texted Bob, this guy has nailed it, and I'm pretty sure he's talking about you, not me. But it doesn't change the fact that he is telling at least the truth about the people he was surrounded with. I think that Bob reminds us that the identity and caliber of the people surrounding him was a consequence of his own actions, of his previous successes. It's a really bizarre equation, that. It's because he was so successful with regards to Brexit and Boris Johnson's majority, he was surrounded by incompetence and decrepitude when the biggest imaginable challenge for his so-called skill set presented itself. That's almost poignant. And historians of the future can indulge the idea that it's poignant or reminiscent of Greek tragedy. If you'd lost someone you loved during the pandemic, it's far, far, far too early to be indulging in that kind of luxury analysis. But Bob didn't. Indeed, Steve says, give that man a cigar. It's a no-smoking studio, Steve, sorry. Max is in Marylebone. Max, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on. First time.
Okay.
Actually, that last caller, he was excellent and took a little bit of wind out of what I wanted to say. But I don't think the preparedness was totally dismantled by Cummings and Johnson. I think it was dismantled by the savagery of the austerity that had gone on before this. That was the major contributor. Regarding Cummings, I think you and I are in a similar boat. It's difficult to find a good word for him, but I guess after yesterday, we both sort of get him a bit more,
yes.
rather than didn't get him at all before.
Yes, that's exactly it, actually. That's exactly it.
And, in terms of what I saw yesterday, I didn't see the whole testimony, and obviously, I didn't see the whole Barnard Castle thing, but what I was seeing was a man who was absolutely fearless in answering any question that was put his way. He stood up to everything that was thrown at him, and in a strange sort of ironic, perverse kind of way, he has set the sort of moral sort of tone for whoever's going to go on after him.
That's really interesting.
And I hope that I'm dying to see whether Sunak or Johnson or Hancock will be anywhere near.
That's really interesting. Here are all my WhatsApps. Here are all my communications. Ask me anything you want. You're right. That's set a precedent, hasn't it?
Yeah, and so he's nailed him And I hope that this ends up sending Hancock to jail. I mean,
there's no way they won't be as a consequence of this inquiry. It doesn't have the sanction, but certainly the idea of this sort of dereliction of duty in public office, a lot of people feel is something that feels like a close to a criminal offence. Max, thank you. You're taking me right up to the news. I think we'll recap on some of those clips after the news, and then return to this sort of curious question of Dominic Cummings and why many, but by no means all of us, feel an unexpected and rather uncomfortable sense of approval, warmth. What is the word? What is the blooming word? A lot of you have suggested kudos. I don't know what the word is for this man who is clearly A, as mad as a box of frogs, and B, profoundly personally responsible for the state of the country, both then and, of course, now. It's 11 o'clock. 4 minutes after 11. Let's play clip roulette, shall we, Keith? Just press a button.
The Cabinet Office was a bomb site, and we had a huge problem of quality control of documents going into meetings, and inconsistent data, inconsistent facts being read out. And many officials have come to me and said, this is causing chaos. There has to be some a formalised system to actually grip this, because the Cabinet Office was a dumpster fire.
4 minutes after 11 is the time. We can't play clip roulette, can we? Because we've got the ones with Henry's inadequate bleeps. Can we confidently play one that hasn't got the inadequate bleep on it? Are you comfortable with that? It's all right. This is on you.
Due in large part to your own WhatsApps, Mr. Cummings, we're going to have to coarsen our language somewhat.
I apologise.
You called ministers useless pigs, morons, in emails and WhatsApps to your professional colleagues.
I mean, I think because we're human beings and we cannot live on an unleavened diet of dismay and disappointment and disgust, I can see some fun in this. I talk about my fondness for creative swearing. I talk about it quite sincerely, but please, and no one has accused me of this, but it's let's get in front of it. And make no mistake about the seriousness of what we're discussing. I think that's why I find myself, I'm going to say unexpectedly drawn to Dominic Cummings, because out of all of them, even now, he seems to be, this is it. Here we got there in the end. It's only taken an hour and 5 minutes. He's the only one who seems to appreciate the seriousness of what they were facing. Now, I may add people to that list. I mean, in government, I don't mean Whitty and Vallance, although he seems to have had his issues with them. He's the only one who seemed to appreciate the twin seriousness. The seriousness of what they were facing, and crucially, the seriousness of how awful the government was. Matt Hancock, again, someone whose shtick I briefly fell for, but you know why we briefly fell for Matt Hancock's shtick, because you didn't want to believe the alternative. How many times, for example, did we sit here with each other during that mad period and say, there must be a plan? Just because we can't see it doesn't mean there isn't. There must be a plan. There's no way that these people are sitting in Downing Street making it up as they go along. It's incomprehensible. But there wasn't a plan. The incomprehensible was happening for a bunch of reasons that we talk about a lot on this programme, because that is what happens when you are propelled to power by lies, and when you are surrounded necessarily by incompetence. You don't have a plan. Matt Hancock, a ridiculous figure in every imaginable way when you think about it. It's incredible, isn't it? It's almost like falling out of love with someone and you can't quite believe you ever fancied them in the first place. I don't mean that I had particularly warm feelings towards Matt Hancock, but you just gave him so many benefits of the doubt because you had no choice. The alternative was to believe that the Secretary of State for Health was a human being of such epic idiocy that thousands of people were going to die unnecessarily. And I don't know what it is psychologically that makes you resist that. You can't. I wasn't ready to believe it. If I didn't do this for a living, I wonder whether I would have done, because you might have done. But I couldn't come on the radio in the morning and say to you, lots of people are going to die because Matt Hancock is a clown. I couldn't do it. I always remember years and years and years ago, when I was a little less careful in my words than I am now, we were talking about probably NHS-related issues, and I just got a message off a lady of a certain age who was due to go in for an operation. I think we were talking about sepsis. Was it sepsis, the thing that people would go into hospital and end up more sick than they were than when they went in? Well, but anyway, she was more scared of going in for her operation than she was of what would happen to her if she didn't go in for her operation. And I remember thinking, that's a tightrope, man. How do we walk that tightrope together? How do we tell the truth about what's happening without frightening, and I'm going to use a slightly lazy figure of speech because it's a powerful one, without frightening little old ladies? And I don't know. So I don't think I could have sat here then at the very beginning and said thousands of people are going to die because Boris Johnson, man, because Boris Johnson is a reprobate and Matt Hancock is a clown. And yet Dominic Cummings was in the middle of Downing Street saying that. And we got there. I think we concluded eventually, didn't we? I've got weird memories of that period, especially the bit when I was in the shed at the bottom of my garden talking to you every day. That was weird. But we got to the point where we knew there had been no plan, didn't we? Heathrow was always a particularly pertinent piece of the jigsaw for me. I remember when Sadiq Khan was possibly in the studio, so that might help pinpoint the timing, probably before the first lockdown. And we'd spent a couple of days taking calls, hadn't we, from travellers, from people who were making their way into the country. And we couldn't believe what we were hearing, because you already had images. New Zealand had already pulled up the drawbridge. Japan had already pulled up the drawbridge. And we were hearing from people. It wasn't just that people were coming in willy-nilly. It was that they weren't really being tested or checked or in any way processed at all. In fact, didn't the first outbreak happen in York from a family that had just arrived from China, I think? And you'd have thought at that point, all right, any more planes from China? But they did nothing. And so you did arrive fairly quickly at the conclusion that there was no plan at all. And there was that was probably one of the biggest things that emerged yesterday. There was no particular urgency beyond Cummings and his coterie to come up with a plan. So Lee Kane, the other bloke who gave evidence yesterday, he's director of communications. So his job is to communicate to the public what the government is doing. But he revealed yesterday, and we might try and dig that clip out for you as well, he revealed yesterday that he had to kind of come up with the actual answers himself. The policy, as it were, because otherwise he'd have to say to journalists who were asking questions what my old geography teacher at school used to say when we asked him things that were beyond his rather limited knowledge of geography. He'd say, don't know, don't need to know, nobody knows. He was a PE teacher who'd retrained as a geography teacher so he could get more money, and he'd only really studied up to the base level of what he needed to do to be a geography. Lovely bloke. I don't want to malign him in any way, but not a great geography teacher. And that's where Lee Kane would have been. So he went further. He came up with his own answers to some of the questions they were being asked. I don't know how long we'll carry on with this. There's 2 phone lines free now. If you're quick, you can grab one. If this was a sort of restoration comedy, we'd call it the curious rehabilitation of Dominic Cummings. Are you, like me, feeling surprisingly warm towards him because at least he appreciated and tried to communicate how awful everything was? Or do you think I've completely taken leave of my senses? This is in the new book, by the way, which is published tomorrow. I'm limiting my plugs this week. I'm doing less this week than I've done in the previous 8 weeks. I don't know why. But the Dominic Cummings chapter contains this line. I can't remember the line exactly, where I halfway through it, I say, I can't quite believe this, but I'm feeling warmer towards him than anyone else in the book for 2 reasons. Number one, he's not in it for himself. He's not looking for a knighthood. He's not looking for a seat in the House of Lords like all these other jokers, all these other clowns. He's not looking for a berth on I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, like Matt flipping Hancock. He's not even looking for a book deal. He's not in it for power, for power's sake. He has the maddest line I discovered about Dominic Cummings when I was researching the book, and he gets a whole chapter. as indeed does Boris Johnson, as does obviously Liz Truss, as does you can see it for yourself tomorrow. The craziest line. Have I told you this already? Then he helped run a referendum campaign in the northeast years before Brexit. It was about devolution. It was John Prescott's plan to have regional parliaments, and Cummings signed up with the opposition. And a lot of the tactics that they deployed, you can see as being the gestation of the tactics he deployed for Brexit. Instead of a big bus with a lie on it, they had a big inflatable white elephant that they used to float around whenever the people they were campaigning against were giving TV interviews. There'd be a hilarious inflatable white elephant in the background because they were trying to portray the idea that a regional parliament would be a white elephant. And they also told lies about the NHS. They say, why would we spend money on a regional parliament when we could be spending it on the NHS, which was just, factually untrue. You can't spend money that was earmarked for a regional parliament on the NHS. It simply doesn't work like that. It's a bit like trying to claim that foreign aid should be spent on the homeless, or people used to tell lies about contraceptive programs in Ethiopia and pretend that somehow meant that the government didn't care about police in Luton or whatever it was. It's wonderful, wonderful tabloid cobblers, but it's cobblers. And he succeeded on these campaigns. This campaign succeeded. And then I read this line. And it said he went back to his father's farm. He went back to his father's farm in County Durham, where they built a bunker in which he spent the next 18 months reading books and trying to understand the world. Now, I don't know how well you know me. But if you know me well, after all the time we've spent together, you probably won't be surprised to learn that kind of appealed to something. That idea. I don't have that level of attention or that thirst, really, for not. But he built a bunker on his father's farm and spent the next 18 months in it reading books and trying to understand the world. So, yes, A, mad as a box of frogs. But B, look at all the rest of them. What did Jacob Rees-Mogg want out of this? A knighthood and some dubious celebrity. And of course, the attempt to be incredibly rude to sensible, happy people who've made him feel inadequate for his entire overprivileged life. What did Nadine Dorries want out of this? A seat in the House of Lords and the opportunity to upset sensible, happy people who'd made her feel inadequate for her entire life. Who else is in the mix? What did David Frost want out of it? Well, a career, frankly, never mind a seat in the House of Lords, and an opportunity to pretend that he wasn't a complete flump. Mission accomplished. Even got a column in the Daily Telegraph. What did all of these people want out of it? What did Matt Hancock want out of it? Oh, a media career, please. Pathetic. What did Dominic Cummings want out of it? All right, he wanted to rule the world. Or he wanted to rebuild the country in a way that he thought would be much more efficient. He is completely bonkers. He is dangerous. I wouldn't let him near the, kitchen. But he was not corrupted in the way that the rest of them were by ambition and desire. And tell me I'm wrong. 0345 60 60973. What's going on? What's going on? Why are we having these weird feelings? There you go. We've finally got the phone in topic. Why are we having these weird feelings about Dominic Cummings? It's 90 minutes after 11, and it's a funny one. It's sort of one of the worst people ever to pollute public life. Is also the only one currently emerging from the COVID-19 inquiry, the only member of government emerging from the COVID-19 inquiry with anything close to credit, because he's telling the truth about everybody else, but he's responsible for everybody else being so awful, or at least you needing to be... anyway, we're talking about Dominic Cummings. It's enough from me. What would you like to say? John's in Maidenhead. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
hi.
John.
We spoke a couple of years ago in the summer when I was hoping there was a conspiracy, and you were trying to convince me there's probably just more cock-up.
Yes.
I think what we're seeing now is that it's probably a hell of a lot more cock-up than any of us ever feared.
Apology accepted, John. Apology accepted.
So So I think there's a slightly different angle to this, and I say this because I'm a neurodivergent individual. I've got autism, probably ADHD, and that means I've got a really overdeveloped sense of moral justice.
Yes, okay.
And that causes me challenges in my own work because of the private sector, because of trying to make profit, and I get that. You need to make profit to exist, but also if you make profit the focus, then you end up excluding all of the good things. Now, I suspect that Dominic Cummings is in my camp and hasn't quite got the same mould developed that I have.
Okay.
That's fine. But ultimately what I think that means is that when I look back, and from what I know about what's going on, from what I've heard of the inquiry so far, and from things that have come out, Substacks or whatever he's put out, I haven't seen too many things where he's been wrong about them. He's actually been wrong about the suggestion or the conclusion or what needs fixing. And the kind of further evidence for him having some moral justice to somewhere. I'm not sure I agree with his direction, but he insisted as part of his coming into the team, the creation of the science and tech department, and that kind of there was a whole piece about how much. I think he ended up getting a couple of billion long-term commitment for that because his belief is that that's where the future is at, and I think he's probably right again. Yes. So he's not there anymore. And he ended up leaving, I believe, because his public credibility was undermined by Barnard Castle, not because he failed at anything he was involved in.
Yeah, I mean, that's not true.
Find me something he was wrong about. I don't like it, but he was right about almost everything I can think of. And
because he was obviously wrong about whether or not Boris Johnson was a suitable candidate for Prime Minister.
It doesn't matter. I agree. He's obviously. Well, I don't think he ever thought he was a suitable candidate. I think
he was wrong about thinking. He was wrong about thinking he'd be able to control Boris Johnson.
I'm not sure he was. I think he probably exercised more. I think he probably exercised more influence over Boris Johnson than he should have been able to
for 4 or 5 months, and then he lost a power battle with Boris Johnson's then fiancée. Which
is a whole separate thing that maybe he underestimated. So maybe there's.
Well, he got that wrong as well. Then the list is getting longer, John.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with you on those. But ultimately, I'm talking about the big stuff. I'm talking about the structures that he was working within, the people, the so on and so forth.
I don't think enough time elapsed for either of us to conclude that he'd succeeded or failed on those. He might have secured the funding, but the department hadn't really done anything. And then remember, he wanted to bring in the weirdos and misfits, and within about 2 hours of one of them being appointed, he turned out to be a massive eugenicist. So he got that horribly wrong as well.
I did. Okay, hold on a second. The person's role was going to be something very different. Whether they've said
you don't hire eugenicists in government. It's one of my rules. It's one of my rules, John.
Agree. Okay, that's a rule.
I don't have them on the team here at LBC either. We've got one rule: no eugenicists. I'm pretty sure.
Anyway,
it'd be very ironic if they were.
Please, James, give me a sec.
Sorry,
what I'm trying to get is that I genuinely believe, I'm quite familiar with Parliament, its estate, and the way it works, and committees, and how they do things, the power structures, and the choices and actions of MPs, their staff. So I know how they work, and sometimes it's justified because they need to get stuff done because they've been elected. Other times it's an abuse of power and it's a push and it's too much. I also understand how wider civil service works. And ultimately, I genuinely believe there is a role that's not properly done at the moment that needs to be a thing that would undermine all of what you've said so far today and hopefully add to the previous caller who I thought was really, really good. Because there is a need for an overdeveloped moral sense of justice in a role to hold the developed plans of others to account.
Yeah, but
and I don't think that is there because all of what you said today and all of the...
Right, you don't think he had an overdeveloped sense of justice?
I think his version of it was shaped towards achieving whatever his end goal is.
Well, that's it. This is where we converge because I think he believes any means justifies the end that he saw in sight, and that's a form of moral delinquency there, John.
Well, so that probably means that his doesn't go along a moral justice line. His goes along an achieving and success and delivery line. So he thinks he's amazing and he thinks he's delivered because, unfortunately, he has delivered. Yes. He set out to win an unwinnable referendum. He won it. He set out to put an improper person in place. He did it. So, unfortunately, he has been successful at things that are horrible. What I'm saying is I think we have similar brains.
I understand.
And I considered applying to his team, and I didn't, because of exactly the fact that I think mine is still ultimately moral, and I struggle with all those kind of, one life for a million type stuff.
Yes,
but when you try and go to actually making and influencing large-scale government policy and making things happen, there's a horrible game you have to play because of the ridiculous structures that they maintain. Even
yes, and he wanted. This is where his desire to dismantle in the hope of rebuilding something better is relatively.
It's right. It's what we need.
Well, I don't know that, but I can see why you agree.
I can tell you that the structures that I had to break things at Parliament to fix them in order to make things work, and I delivered things that I was told were not deliverable because I did exactly that. I did that trying to play the game, trying to be nice to people, but also taking quite senior figures in the House, the people that have names and titles, taking them and saying, I will give you lots of engagement in this, but I am not going to listen to you about the overall direction because that is my direction and this is my speciality and we will make it work. And it did, and they thanked me for it later, but they didn't like it. Now, the rest of the building, the rest of the structures are like that. There's so much ingrained. I mean, the fact they don't even want to leave a building that is unsafe because they know that if they leave, they'll never go back. They're right. But they probably shouldn't be there because that probably isn't the way
we're changing lane a bit now. But you're talking, I think, is the word sclerotic? I keep meaning to look that up to be completely clear about. I hope that's not like a venereal disease or something like that. And I've just
possibly. I don't know enough about the definition.
But you mean that it's like swimming in treacle to get anything done? I think.
Yes, yes. And the nature of the estate is important. It should be respected. Does need space and time. MPs that are elected from the back end of nowhere should still be able to make change. That's what they're there for. I get it. But the way that they do it is so concentrated and
there is also an argument I suspect you won't have much sympathy for that parts of that has to be the case because you need the checks and balances in play. Cummings kind of wanted the best of both worlds. You need regulation, you need scrutiny, you need standards. And by wanting to dismantle what you would see as treacleish and sclerotic, he kind of ended up getting into bed with a bloke who wanted to be able to ride roughshod over all the standards and all the moral codes or the behavioural codes that you hold dear, John, but which he was quite happy to torch in pursuit of an ambition that you might have shared, but there's no way that you would have considered parliamentary standards or the ministerial code to be acceptable collateral damage for the pursuit of that overall ambition. And that perhaps is where your not perhaps, if I've understood you correctly, that's where your moral code would diverge from his. Cajan's in Wimbledon. Cajan, what would you like to say?
I feel sorry for you, James. I think you've been drinking up the Ministry of Mind-Altering Befuddlement.
What have I said today that's wrong?
Oh, nothing. But this whole thing about should we have some bit of compassion for?
No, definitely haven't used the word compassion.
No, you haven't. But sort of, if we should sort of, is he the best?
Should we acknowledge that he alone, from members of the government, is telling the truth about what the government did?
Yeah, but he was part of what the government did.
Well, obviously.
So how can
so were all the people who aren't telling the truth.
Yes, obviously.
Which makes him better than them.
In the game. Because they're still in the game, see, because they're still hoping to stay in power in some way, shape or form, whereas he knows he's out of it.
Well, Boris Johnson isn't.
Well, I wouldn't put it past Boris to try and make a comeback.
But because I wouldn't put it past Dominic Cummings to try and make a comeback. That's a silly contribution. Boris Johnson's way out of the game, and he's still completely denying the reality that Dominic Cummings describes.
Yes, but at the same time...
So none of this is really holding water, or indeed Kool-Aid.
No. But we are living in strange times. I mean, I think, the only two people who I would like to actually hear from are Whitty and Vallance. I think the rest of them, I mean, is there any point in listening to what they have to say?
Well, I think that's probably where we diverge, because I am interested in what Cummings has to say, and I am now interested in what the key decision makers, because you're describing the advisors and the reasons why they didn't take the advice of the advisors. I think I saw some dreadful character claiming that Johnson and Sunak were the only ones who had their heads screwed on, and they got distracted by all the doom mongers who wanted to have lockdowns and actually respond to the pandemic. So no, I'm not with you on that. I do want to hear what they all have to say. I don't hold out much hope that it will be as unvarnished as what Dominic Cummings has had to say. But of course, one man's unvarnished is another man's self-serving. I'll let Jason respond to your point, Cajan, because he puts it nicely. He goes, telling the truth and deserving some redemption for that. He's more truthful than Johnson is the credit he deserves. I mean, to be fair, I had a goldfish when I was growing up that was more truthful than Boris Johnson. So I like Jason's sort of tongue-in-cheek encomium. I don't know that it's much praise indeed to say. Well, I'll tell you what. You say what you like about Dominic Cummings, eh? He's more honest than Boris Johnson. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It is 25 to 12. Ian, no. Would that work? Would that work if I just answer questions that come in by text without reading the question out? Would that make you feel special if you'd sent one? So Ian has asked me a question and the answer to that question, Ian, is no. That doesn't work, does it? No. Ian asks, is PMQs coming up? To which the answer is no. There's no PM. Why is there no PMQs, Henry Riley?
Are we in recess? I think we're in recess.
What's this one for? The King's Speech coming up, is it? When's that?
I believe so. In November. You've caught me off guard here. It's later. I think it's in 2 weeks.
Okay. Why do they get today off then? Anyway, so I've answered that question. And here is just some evidence of how much I love my job. It's a brilliant show this morning. It has to be one of the best. That's very kind of you. Unsigned text. And Tony writes, James, you're going to lose me. I usually agree with a lot of what you say, but today, no, you can't warm to Dominic Cummings. He's a liar, a born liar. He's no better than the rest of them. He's a self-serving, arrogant, and thinks he's the only one with a brain. I wonder whether, Tony, that is my thesis as well. He is the only one with a brain. Although Helen McNamara, should we remind ourselves of what Dominic Cummings had to say about Helen McNamara before finding out what Helen McNamara has been saying to the COVID inquiry today? She was in Downing Street for just under 2 years, I think, in a relatively senior position.
If I have to come back to Helen's with PET, what's that, propriety and ethics?
Yes.
Part of the Cabinet Office, or number 10. Designed to waste huge amounts of my time so I can't spend it on other stuff, I'll personally handcuff her and escort her from the building. Had you got form, Mr. Cummings, for arranging for people to be escorted from number 10 before?
You shouldn't believe everything you read in the newspapers. That story is not accurate.
I don't care how it's done, but that woman must be out of our hair. We cannot keep dealing with this horrific meltdown of the British state while dodging stilettos from that.
Much better editing on that occasion. I don't think there's any need for us to dump that like there was last time we played that clip. Remind us what her role was, Henry.
So she was the Deputy Cabinet Secretary in Downing Street.
So big job.
Very big job. I mean,
the propriety and ethics bit there is her reminding him what he was and was not allowed to do.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
he has very little time for that.
She was very much an enforcer of the rules, which I think obviously Dominic Cummings wanted to throw the rule book out per se. But I mean, very different role to Dominic Cummings. He was obviously a political advisor. She's very much a civil servant. So she's been questioned by Andrew O'Connor. He's another one, member of counsel to the inquiry, much like Hugo Keith, who we heard about yesterday. Another KC. We've learnt a number of things, James. Firstly, and this is an ongoing issue, actually, we spoke about earlier with regards to mobile phones, Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. With Helen McNamara's phone, when she left the job at Downing Street, she handed it back to the Cabinet Office, and now they cannot trace the messages any longer.
I feel like I've had to be my own forensic archaeologist of my time because of the difficulties with accessing documents, accessing the right information, and because, unfortunately, the Cabinet Office deleted my work mobile phone, so I've not had access to those records either.
And we'll come to one or two parts of your evidence where you say you're sure that there were relevant WhatsApp messages and so on that you sent, but you no longer have them because you returned your phone to the Cabinet Office when you left, and they have been unable to provide it back to you. And I think they've told you that is it the phone itself that's been destroyed, or has the material been deleted?
I'm not entirely sure.
So who answers for that?
Well, that's the Cabinet Office's issue.
So Simon Case, or
potentially.
What an absolute mess.
It does beg the question as to why those messages were deleted. She actually doesn't know whether the phone was destroyed.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It could have just been sold or recycled, or you can send them off for charity sometimes. When I left the Daily Express many years ago, I had to hand my phone back, and I realised shortly afterwards that it had Eminem's mobile number on it.
As in the rapper?
As in Eminem.
Oh, wow.
As in Eminem.
Wow.
Yeah. Carry on.
I haven't got anything like that on my phone. She also seemed to suggest, James, she mentioned Brexit on 3 occasions, that actually the focus on Brexit did not necessarily take away, but certainly diverted the Prime Minister's attention on the early stages of the pandemic.
I do know that the kind of monomaniacal focus of him and his political team, for reasons which I'm sure that they would happily give, on just focusing on EU exit from July 2019, and then getting to the election meant that they, at least in the way it was communicated to us, everything else could wait till after this question was settled, and then there was going to come a very large amount of change, and we were just not sure what that change was ever going to be.
And just going back to the beginning of this paragraph, these are all matters that you say contributed to this sense of being on the back foot at the beginning of that year, and that was one of them, was it?
She also says that Boris Johnson categorically rejected that. He said that we were well prepared for a pandemic, and he was also not convinced, according to her, of the severity.
The tone of the cabinet briefs on the coronavirus, and in particular the injections of caution I made about the uncertainty of the picture, did not register with Mr Johnson. He rarely referred to the brief. In those early cabinet meetings in particular, Mr Johnson was very confident that the UK would sail through, and we should all be careful of overcorrecting in advance of something that was unlikely to have a huge impact, and for which, in any case, we were well prepared.
And it was a pretty confident climate in general, so it wasn't unusual for the message that we were going to be great at it to be the kind of general overriding message of anything that was brought before the cabinet.
Helen McNamara also describes a macho attitude in number 10, where she reports that Boris Johnson claimed the UK would be world-beating at tackling COVID.
The atmosphere and discussion in the morning meetings, I intended, was confident and macho. This in itself was not a new thing, but it seemed even more so than usual. We were going to be world-beating at conquering COVID-19 as well as everything else.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, just that it was striking that something that I felt personally was obviously deeply worrying, that there was a sort of de facto assumption that we were going to be great without any of the hesitancy or questioning or that sort of behind closed doors bit of government, which isn't about saying everything's smashing and going brilliantly, but actually being a bit more reflective and checking that everything's going to be quite as great as we'd like it to be.
Shortly after, the conversation went back to the assertion that we were so well prepared, we shouldn't panic. And you say you left the room even more concerned that we were in the wrong place tonally, feeling I had been patronised for raising the point, and I was particularly bothered by the supreme confidence I had heard.
Gosh.
And lastly, James, this assertion that the UK was very well prepared, that we were going to sail through, Helen McNamara alleges that actually it meant that many in Downing Street were laughing at the Italians when their number of coronavirus cases came up.
If we could just tell people what the right and kind and proper thing to do is, people would do that. And sitting there and saying it was great and sort of laughing at the Italians was it just felt completely, well, it felt how it sounds.
And Helen McNamara is still in front of the inquiry at the moment.
She's good, isn't she? Very, very measured. I mean, to be honest, my sort of flirtation with mild approbation for Dominic Cummings begins to wear a bit thin when you hear someone who is articulate, honest and mild-mannered giving evidence without reference to, long, sweary lists of rants. And she was one of the people that Cummings had a problem with. It's delusion and dishonesty. I think those are the words we were using at the time. The delusion of exceptionalism, the idea that we will somehow prevail because we're British. That was created by the Brexit success, by that ludicrous, boosterish, is it xenophobia or jingoism? I forget the difference. So you've got that, the delusion, but then the deception. So you could say we'll do better than everybody else even though we've got the same tools. But to say we've got better tools is just a straight deception. I'm reminded, I suspect you were a schoolboy sportsman, were you, Henry?
Ish.
Yeah.
Captain of the C team.
There we go. That is the kind of that. So he sounds like someone who thinks that he can encourage the team to victory with rhetoric rather than science or knowledge or evidence or fact. Come on, we can do. And that's not even a criticism. It is a criticism because of what happened next. But you can see why it's always worked in the past. Come on, folks. Hey, whoa, down with the eye ties, or whatever he would say in those circumstances.
Which sounds familiar. I remember when David Cameron, when Boris Johnson was seriously ill with coronavirus, saying that he was very good at tennis and was a fighter and whatnot. So I definitely think other people also help play into that attitude.
Yeah, you don't need to worry about Boris. I've seen him play tennis. He said.
That was it.
Yeah, it is very much It's almost like you've read my last book, Henry. It is 11:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Speaking of books, Dom Jolly will be with us shortly to tell us about his latest. 11:48 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And the question of the curious case of Dominic Cummings' putative rehabilitation, we'll put back on ice. There may be time for one or two more calls, but I want to turn your attention next to I can't quite believe that I'm helping to promote a non-fiction book that is published on November the 2nd. How did this happen? Does no one ever check the schedules?
Because you know very well that you're going to absolutely smash me in the charts. That's fine. I'm a slowly catchy monkey.
Don't be ridiculous.
Yeah.
The Conspiracy Tourist Travels Through a Strange World by Dom Jolly looks at, well, you tell us.
Well, it's looking at the weird world of conspiracies. I a bit like you, but online, I spend a lot of time finding myself in arguments with conspiracy theorists and conspiracy-minded. And in the old days, to me, conspiracies were fun. They were quite, almost amusing. Did we land on the moon? Yetis. It was kind of okay. And then suddenly it seemed, whether Yetis are conspiracy is another discussion. But then it seemed to me there was a shift in the world, and it became suddenly part of the body politic. It became quite scary. Trump, to me, the absolute changing moment was Kellyanne Conway saying alternative facts. Once alternative facts were out, then there's no truth. We're post-truth. And I'd fight these people, anti-vaxxers and flat earthers and all sorts. And there was no point. And actually, the more I spoke to people, the more you realise that if you take on conspiracists, they actually retreat into their bunker. They're a bit like cult members. So I thought, and actually part of me thought, do you really believe this stuff? Or is it just, is it part of our polarised algorithms? And, so anyway, I just thought it would be a great way, because I've written a lot of travel books. I love going travelling and I need a reason. So I thought I'd go off around the world sort of hanging out in conspiracy places and with conspiracy people, firstly to see if they actually meant what they were saying, and secondly to try and work out, maybe I was wrong. I really tried to go with an open mind, but it didn't last too long.
No, I dare say. I didn't know that there are geographical focuses for conspiracy theories, because you mentioned the internet. I sort of think of them as, I suppose I'm saying I'm surprised you managed to
find destinations.
Yes.
Two were very easy, because firstly, there's an amazing chart, a conspiracy chart, by this one called Abby Roberts, that I'm sure you've seen, which kind of charts the progressive insanity of conspiracy theories, starting with ones that might happen. And I had a look on that, and I thought I'd try and pick ones from, each rung. And the first thing that hit me was one said, Finland does not exist. And I thought, well, that's got to be done. And my wife, I go travelling a lot and she doesn't go with me, had long said, I must come on one of your trips. So I thought, this is the one. Finland. So I took my poor long-suffering wife to Finland for 5 days to try and prove it exists. Now, the conspiracy is actually, it was a sort of joke on Reddit that kind of went viral. And then, like all these things, about 10% of people actually took it for real. And if you believe the conspiracy, it's that just at the end of the First World War, Russia and Japan conspired to pretend that Finland didn't exist, or they said Finland didn't exist, because actually what's there is sea, where they can have the fishing rights, and then the fish taken from Finland would be taken to Japan on the Trans-Siberian Express under the guise, which was very good for me, of Nokia products. It was fantastic.
So this is a perfect opening chapter in a way, because the natural response to that is for me to say to you, I have been to Helsinki.
Or have you? And
what would the people say in response to that?
Well, that was the whole point, really. I actually thought, because one of the big problems with conspiracy theories that you would know way more than me is the impossibility of arguing, proving a negative, arguing with conspiracy theorists. And I thought, actually, how do I? And I've now been to Helsinki, or have I? Because if you believe the very weird Finland deniers, they are actors, and I was actually landed somewhere in Russia or Sweden. I asked the person when I landed, and I gave him my passport, where am I? And he said, Helsinki, Finland. Now, if I was a conspiracy theorist, I'd say, yeah, but you're in on it, aren't you? And then he'd point me maybe to my phone and say, well, why don't you look on the maps? I go, yeah, but who's set up the maps?
Controlling the satellites?
It's always Bill Gates.
Yes, of course. He does get a lot of credit.
Bill Gates gets a lot of
everything, really. All roads lead to Bill
I'm sure Bill Gates is not by any means a perfect person, but of all the billionaires to pick on, it seems to me Bill Gates is slightly more decent than a lot of them.
I don't think that's a coincidence.
You don't think so?
No. Now I'm going to sound like a conspiracy theorist.
You know what's going to happen, isn't it? It's going to be like you Gates shills after this.
Well, George Soros and Bill Gates.
And George Soros. If someone could tell me where to send an invoice.
Well, same here. I must be owed thousands. But they both are committed to using their fortunes to help lots of other people.
I agree.
So if you were a shady billionaire committed to not using your fortunes to help other people, then you would probably welcome the demonisation of Bill Gates and George Soros. So that's the closest I get to.
That's a double conspiracy off, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
One of the other great things I find about conspiracies is that if you are, if it is this new secret world order and Illuminati and stuff, they seem incredibly keen to tell us about it. As an example, one of the things you really, if you look up conspiracies, Denver International Airport comes up a lot, and that's for many reasons. Denver International Airport is the largest land area of airport in America, despite it only being Colorado, and there's rumours that there's miles of tunnels underneath it. Again, conspiracy theorists obsessed with tunnels. If they find out about the London Underground, we're in trouble. And they think that's where the Illuminati are going to go when the rapture comes.
Right.
But, so you'd think you'd keep that quiet, but no, apparently if you look at Denver International Airport from the air, they've shaped the runways in the shape of a swastika.
So you know that this is the target.
Similarly, when that big ship got stuck in the Suez Canal, it was owned by a company called Evergreen, which turned out to be Hillary Clinton's code name. So, and apparently that was Hillary Clinton transporting children somewhere, and obviously she'd put her name along the side of the boat. In the end, actually, it was one of the things it was taking was a large plastic T-Rex.
This bit's true.
This bit's true to a playground. So the whole thing's very odd.
Well, so you meet the people as well. You meet.
I met some very strange people. I mean, the strangest one actually, well, the weirdest was actually in England. I found out about a hotel in Tintagel in Cornwall, owned by John Mappin, who you might be aware of.
From the Mappin and Webb jewellery family.
That's right. And he famously flew the QAnon flag on top of his castle, which is called Camelot Castle, which is a hotel. And I think he was giving discounts to anti-vaxxers. So anyway, I thought, a weekend break here. So I went and stayed there. And it's very difficult to explain the madness of that weekend because there's a sort of captive artist kept in the basement, and the whole hotel is absolutely plastered in this frankly appalling art. And part of it seems to be quite a sort of an attempt to sort of force sell this art. Everywhere it says, please go and see Ted's Lightbox, which I thought might be a euphemism, but it wasn't. It's all very weird.
Did you get a warm welcome? I mean,
to be fair, I did. I didn't hide. I've tried before to stay in hotels under pseudonyms. I did a tour once and signed in as Napoleon Bonaparte, but then when you lose your key, you have no ID saying you're Napoleon Bonaparte. So I went as me, and I spent a lot of time, maybe too much time, with Ted in his basement looking at his lightbox. But then I did finally get an audience with John Mappin. And you know what? When I met him, he seemed quite a decent, he's sort of someone you and I would probably recognise. And, he's sort of very sure of himself and seemed fairly decent, sat there with his wife, and he started talking to me about stuff. And after a bit, I was sitting next to his dog, and I always trust people with dogs, which is not a great yardstick. And both the dog and I, after about half an hour, looked at each other and said, please, I've just got to get out of here, as it went progressively more bonkers.
Are there any uniting characteristics? Is that too glib a question? Do you sort of, can you point at a couple of things that they all have in common, all of the people who believe unbelievable things?
Well, I think one of the things is they're not, I think one of the cliches is that these people, conspiracists, are stupid. That's, I think, far from the case, actually. I think a lot of people, they overthink, if anything. I think the real weirdness about it is the sort of, I suppose the thing that unites them is that once you believe in one, you tend to sort of
Why is that, do you think?
I think because, well, firstly, I set up a fake Instagram page as a conspiracist, and oh my God, the algorithm, immediately gets to work. And it goes, oh, you're interested in flat earthers. Because I took a flat earther. There's a flat earth movement. I don't know if you know.
A bit about it.
There's a round flat earth movement, which is sort of classic flat earth.
Yes.
But there's a splinter group who are the square flat earth, who are the square flat earth, and they believe in four corners of the flat earth. And those four corners are Hydra in Greece, Papua New Guinea, the Bermuda Triangle randomly, and an island called Fogo off Newfoundland.
Okay.
So I took a flat earther to the island of Fogo to try and find the edge of the earth, and I won't ruin the book for you, but we didn't find it.
You did? Oh, well, that's a spoiler.
Yeah.
How many conspiracies are in there? Because there's more than one in some chapters, or at least they merge. And
yeah, I basically did Does Finland Exist? I went on a massive American road trip, which incorporates Roswell, JFK. I chased Alex Jones around from InfoWars around Austin. I went to Denver International Airport. Then I did the John Mappin, which is kind of vaxing and stuff. And then there's the Flat Earther. But as I'm going, when I was in Newfoundland taking the Flat Earther, you suddenly realise that the Titanic sank off Newfoundland, and there's a conspiracy about everything. There's a conspiracy that the Titanic wasn't the actual one that sank, it was an insurance job. There's another one classically that it was, or bankers were doing it to crash the pound, dollar or whatever. I mean, it's incredible how similar these stories are all the way through the.
Yes, but you can never quite pin down what the thematic similarity is, can you? It's just a desire to believe, a desperate desire to believe there's something going on below the surface that only you and your fellow, oddly enough, your fellow Illuminati are party to.
I think it's a bit more than that. I think as humans, I think we like patterns, we like logic. And one of the real things that I found doing this book was essentially it's chaos. The world is complex and chaotic.
Want to impose order
and people want to impose order. Secondly, if you feel slightly dispossessed, maybe things aren't going well, the idea that you have this secret knowledge that kind of gives you a reason why this hasn't happened is amazing. And also,
or if the world hasn't recognised your specialness.
Yeah, it does give you that. But also, most importantly, especially with social media, it gives you a tribe. It's that your footballification thing. It is the tribe.
People
you get
who
a tribe.
Surrendering their actual families for membership of the actual tribe.
And if you want to leave, then you're a traitor. I mean, you can't just suddenly change your mind. It's really difficult. I met a guy who was deep down the rabbit hole and got out. And he's had to sort of, it's like someone coming out of a cult.
Yes, of course it is.
Yeah.
Do you have a favourite? Is there one which you could have, but if you'd been born under a different star, you might have gone for?
Well, I really like the moon landing one because the moon landing, it's such a massive conspiracy,
yes,
but it kind of makes
so many people, wouldn't it?
But it does make sense because JFK promised that they'd have a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and they just squeezed it in. You can imagine them saying, "Can we film it?" And then there was that film called Capricorn 1 about it, which starred O.J. Simpson. The plot thickens.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And Hillary Clinton, I think.
Of course.
You're taking it on tour as well, Dom.
I am. So I'm doing a big UK tour in February, March. And if anyone would like tickets, go to domjolly.tv. Thank you for plugging that.
Lovely stuff. The Conspiracy Tourist Travels Through a Strange World by Dom Jolly is published tomorrow in hardback, the 2nd of November 2023.
But don't worry, I'm not going to be troubling you in the charts.
What are you talking about?
You know what I'm talking about.
I don't know what you mean.
Yeah.
My book's cheaper. It's 12 noon. It's 4 minutes after 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, for which, of course, I thank you. Helen McNamara continues to give evidence. I don't know whether we'll catch up a little bit further with that in this hour, although I have got another author coming in to tell you about their latest work, Noel Fitzpatrick, colloquially, of course, known as the supervet. Lovely, lovely, lovely man. One of my all-time favourite episodes of Full Disclosure, actually, was with Noel, so he'll be joining us shortly before Sheila time. But McNamara's evidence continues to compel. I want to move on to something completely different, though, something arguably a little lighter, although as soon as I sort of thought about saying those words, I remembered getting beaten at school. So, it's not that light, really. Not exactly a laugh a minute, although I did, as I've told you on many occasions in the past, spend much of my adult life persuaded and persuading others that corporal punishment had done me no harm whatsoever. For reasons that I won't bore you with again, but which I have gone into in quite a lot of detail, both on air and off air. I mention that because there is a school story about teachers going on strike because the rules are too strict at the school where they teach. I'll say that again because it's a proper head turner, isn't it? Teachers are to strike over draconian behaviour policies that they are being asked to enforce by school bosses. It's a school in Cambridgeshire called the St Ivo Academy. It's in St Ives, which always makes you think of Cornwall, but there is a St Ives in Cambridgeshire as well. And the teaching union looking after most of these teachers, says that they are being asked to enforce questionable rules that undermine their authority in the classroom. ITV News in Anglia have done quite a detailed report on this. And the claim is that children have been left terrified. And parents have said that the measures are having a detrimental impact. There's a lot to unpack here. Because I don't know enough about the academy system to understand how parents can end up having to send children to a school they don't want to send their children to, where their children are reportedly terrified. There are claims that children have wet themselves because they're not allowed to go to the toilet. They all have to line up in rows on the tennis courts for their morning address. That sounds less shocking. If you haven't got a pen, you get an automatic detention or other equipment. So these are some of the sources that the union has identified, some of the measures that a union source has identified. Pupils who do not have a pen or other equipment are given an automatic detention. At that point, I would automatically think about neurodivergent children who are not going to be able to either cope with or understand rules like that, but possibly there are dispensations in place. Pupils are not being allowed to go to the toilet, as I mentioned, and the teachers are there for going on strike. Now, a spokesman for the trust said, obviously it's disappointing news that strike action is going ahead. We believed that there was 3 remaining issues of contention covering staff development, a dress code for staff, and limiting the number of after-school meetings to 1 per week. Last Friday, we agreed on further consultation and engagement. Our doors remain open for further discussion. In the meantime, they will open as normal on strike days. So, I mean, the detail of that will no doubt emerge or not in the coming days. I'm fascinated by strictness in schools because I spent most of my life thinking it was a really good thing. I don't understand this psychologically. I don't understand why grown-ups who got into quite a lot of trouble as children become quite authoritarian. Do you? Do you know? Can you think why that would be? There's probably some fairly obvious answers to that. I've got one, which I'll share with you shortly. But why would the children who got into the most trouble as kids, why would the adults who got into the most trouble as children be the ones who end up being most in favour of strict rules and draconian measures? With me, and forgive me if you've heard this one before, but with me, it was the effort I'd put into persuading myself that it hadn't done me any harm. But I'm talking about beatings. That's not the same as getting a detention if you've not got a pencil or having to cross your legs and wait until break to go to the toilet. An actual beating, no one really argues in favour of corporal punishment anymore, although some people still think that they should be able to knock their own children about a bit. You don't really want to give that power to teachers over your children. But I needed to persuade myself that it hadn't done me any harm. It's both physical and mental. You have to convince yourself that you're not in agony. You have to. Do you see why? It's like a survival mechanism. So I'd put my hands out. I always remember, I can smell it. It's this particular floor polish. You'd open the door, knock on the door. Come in. Hello. Yes, hello, sir. Close the door. Well, you've done this and that and the other, haven't you? What have you got to say for yourself? Yeah. Right, put your hand out. And you put your hand out like this. And this big man, he was about 6'3", smash into your hand with like this weird rubber paddle. Man, did it hurt. God, it hurt. But you kind of had to... What would you do if you gave in to the pain? What would you do if you gave in to the humiliation and the shame? You'd sort of curl up in a ball in the corner of the changing rooms. A couple of lads did, I've got to be honest. You'd curl up in a ball in the corner of the changing rooms and just sob your little heart out. And I was knee-high to a grasshopper when this started. I was about 10 years old. So I think this is relevant to the broader question of strictness, because you then end up arguing that there's nothing wrong with what's happened to you, because the alternative is to open the door upon the pain and the shame that you feel. So you keep it really tightly locked. And the more tightly locked it is, the more likely you are to claim that it's the only language some children understand. Essentially, it's abuse denial. You're essentially denying that you've been abused because the scale of that admission or realization is so great. It's so gross and so great. I am a victim of child abuse. I don't want to be a victim of child abuse. That makes me feel pain and shame and anger, and I don't want to feel pain and shame and anger. So thank you very much. But what I will do instead is insist that very, very strict rules are good for children. I don't want to spoil the phone-in by focusing on physical abuse, on beatings, all right? But that's the only bit I can really talk about, helpfully. But I think the question of why the rule breakers, why the children... why the adults who, as children, got into the most trouble end up becoming the most supportive of draconian measures is a fascinating question, and I'd love you to answer it. I'd also like you to tell me how strict is too strict. So I was at boarding school, as you probably know, so I never really had the opportunity to tell mum and dad about what was happening to me. You know, you don't go home every night, and I mean, they knew about beatings. It wasn't a secret. It was part of the school's sort of disciplinary policy. But the idea of a parent saying, or a parent, the child tells you, we used to side with the teachers, didn't we? Mums and dads, 70s, 80s, early 90s. I wonder when it began to change. You'd side with the teachers against your own children usually, because they were in loco parentis. So if you were in trouble with your teacher, it would be wait till your father gets home territory. You would be in trouble at home as well. And then something shifted. In the course of me doing this job, in the 20 years that I've been doing this job, we noted a shift, didn't we? And that teachers would tell us that parents would get really cross with them for punishing their children. Whereas previously they'd been almost partners in punishment. Now the parent was very much on the child's side, which in many ways feels like progress, doesn't it? It feels like a good thing. But when you reach the point that your child is telling you, and I do want to steer you away from beatings, because I want to keep it, I've done it the wrong way around, haven't I? Everyone's going to ring me about being beaten now, and I don't want to sound ungrateful or unsympathetic, but that's not what I want this phone-in to be about. That's just my springboard into the question of why children who got into the most trouble, adults who got into the most trouble as children, end up being most in favour of strict rules and authoritarianism when they become adults. So what is it, and this keeps it much simpler as well if you don't want to join me in the psychological stroke philosophical contemplations. When did your child come home and tell you about something that was happening at school that was by no means illegal or anything like that? I don't want to go down that road. But which you just thought was too strict. Okay? Because I've been... what's the word I'm looking for? I've been out of the game, really. I don't mean I've got daughters, and I've never had any moment where they're good. Can't say they're good kids, because good kids get into trouble too. But I've never really had any engagement with discipline, scholastic discipline. I never had detentions or anything. So what is it? How much is too much? When your children said to you, at my school, they do this, or my teacher does that, and it's policy. It's not like a one-off outlying teacher or a wrong 'un or a rogue. It's school policy, and you have genuinely thought that's not right. What was it? What was the punishment? What was the policy? And what can you do about it? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. So I think I've got two questions, possibly three. Three. Okay, so the first one is, why do the adults who got into the most trouble as children end up being the ones most in favour of authoritarian and draconian school rules? 0345 6060 973. The second is, when and why did parents shift from being on the side of the teacher in a punishment process to being on the side of the child? I'd just love to know what your thoughts are on that. I don't think there's a definitive answer. And then finally, how much is too much? Well, just a little thing or a big thing, but these parents are dealing with children who reportedly are getting sick on Sundays at the prospect of going back to school on Mondays. They are reportedly wetting themselves, spending entire weekends dreading the return to the classroom. These are claims from teachers who've spoken to ITV, and the parents have described children being terrified. So what? And I don't know what the legal situation is if you've got personal knowledge of this particular school in Cambridgeshire, but we can walk that tightrope together. So there we go. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I really want to call in, James, as a first-time caller, but I'm nervous as hell. Listen, I'm pretty good these days at looking after people who ring in feeling nervous, particularly if it's a story of personal pain. But I can only promise you to do my best, always. 12:17 is the time. It is 20 minutes after 12. There's just a quick change of direction because of a text that's caught my eye from Matt, who's been in touch to say, my granddad, Malcolm Allen Norman, passed away last Friday. He played for Bristol Rovers in the days of them playing the likes of Manchester United, but he also played for Kidderminster Harriers in 1962. So, Matt, of course, I'll join you in hoping that he rests in peace. Crikey, goalkeeper. I've just looked up, actually. It would be a bit ridiculous of me to pretend that I knew he was a goalkeeper after he played for Kidderminster Harriers for one season in 1962. But thanks for letting me know. 20 minutes after 12 is the time. Strictness. How much is too much? And what can a parent do about it? Sorry if that makes me sound ignorant as a parent of school-aged children, but it's just not something that's come up. My dad knocked a teacher out once. I may get onto that story a little later, but it obviously didn't occur in normal circumstances. What can you do about it? If your children are at a school and you think that the punishment is really, really unfair, what can you do about it? I presume nothing. Rob's in Cambridge. Rob, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. First-time caller, long-time listener. Thank you. Both my children, I've got a daughter now, she's 22, my son is 18. They both went to what we still think and was at the time a progressive academy, right, in Northamptonshire. What we noticed over time, lots of good things about the school, really good things. I don't want to denigrate the school at all, but one of the things little things would sort of wind me and their mum up. It would be things like in the summer, they weren't allowed, it'd be sweltering hot and they weren't allowed to take their jumper off. They were just sort of little things that we just couldn't understand. Yeah. My daughter was quite good at two shoes. My son, slightly mischievous at times, but nothing, not really a classroom disruptor as such. But he just used to get called. Not so much me, because I was working away a lot at the time. But my kid's mum would, she'd get called up to school, sort of, in the week. Oh, Sonny's been in trouble again, and blah blah.
What sort of thing? What would there be?
Well, it'd just be not sort of not paying attention, But the odd occasion, he probably dozed off. His head's been wobbling in class,
And what punishments were doled out?
It was isolation.
What does isolation mean? Sorry, forgive me.
Removed from the classroom and to study on their own. Just go and sit in a room,
which is quite brutal, isn't it?
Well, I think it is. I mean, I went to a boys' school, and that was strict in the 70s. It was proper mortarboard and gown sort of headmaster. And I mean, poor kids who were sort of, who didn't have much money, they turned up with no PE kit. They were made to wear like the most goddamn awful PE kit.
I had to wear girls' pants.
Oh God!
I was very young though. I think I might have wet myself. I was about 5. And I wore a big girl's PE pants. What could you do as a parent if you felt that the punishment was unfair?
Well, there wasn't really much. I can't sort of recall to mind, what my wife's, what the sort of conclusion would be. We sort of have a word with our son and say, look, just keep your head down.
No, he can get sent into isolation for keeping his head down.
Well,
Keep your head up, son. Keep your head up, son, but also keep it down at the same time.
Yeah, it just felt like lots of little, just like, really, it was a little bit sort of like that.
That's a nice way of putting it. It's just that sense of it being pointless, because I think that discipline has a point, it has a purpose. You need order in a classroom, but at the point at which it becomes almost an end in itself, and it's all. There's a teacher who appears on the television sometimes who seems almost proud of how little freedom and imagination her children are allowed to demonstrate, and I think that just strikes me as weird. But I think the school gets amazing results, so there'll be some other people who think, well, that's QED. I don't know, but how much is too much? Mia is, thank you, Rob, staying in Cambridgeshire. Mia is also there. Mia, what would you like to say?
Hi. I mean, I just really wanted to come on as a parent with a student at that school that's been mentioned in Cambridgeshire this morning.
Yes.
My daughter has learning difficulties, undiagnosed at the moment. She started off school really well. I will say she is really good outside of school.
Yeah.
But in the last year at school, her behaviour's really dropped off a cliff, and I do feel that these rules that are being imposed at the school, which I can say are true, everything that you've relayed on the radio this morning, I've actually had evidence of. But it's now got to a stage where I have a daughter that, because she struggles academically and is far behind, she is fighting against the rules and getting detentions, certainly on a weekly basis.
So she's in a vicious circle, really, isn't she?
Yeah. Sometimes she can get more than one detention in a day, and partly that is just because she walks out because it's overwhelming for her. That then gets her in further trouble. So it's been horrendous this last year.
When were the rules brought in?
I think the rules have hardened really in certainly the last 6 months. They've hardened without
and
a doubt.
how much information do you get? Do you get a letter saying we're introducing this and we're introducing that?
Yeah, we often do get letters, and there's big kickback about some of the things that are actually coming in at the school at the moment. I mean, the latest one over the half term was that they're going to be having a clamp down on the dress code. Now, that might be the girls, if their skirts are too long, they try to roll them up to make them shorter. Typical teenage girl thing, but they're clamping down on things like that. They're not allowed to wear black trainers, even if they've got a logo that's completely black. For example, Nike Forces, they're not allowed to wear those. So they're literally being inspected.
Do you understand why? Do you understand why?
Not fully, no. I think it's
because that's probably the crucial bit, isn't it? If you could understand why, even if you didn't really like it, then it would feel easier to cope with than just it feels arbitrary. You're just what rule are we going to come up with this week? I know, black trainers.
Yeah. I think it's so that everybody's, in the same, no one's got any branding whatsoever, and therefore it does, stamp down potentially on bullying. But if it's a plain black trainer with a black logo,
yeah, I guess no. But the ones you mentioned cost a lot more money than shoes with no logos at all. So I don't know. Maybe there's a rationale behind that. What about the toilet breaks?
They're not allowed to go to toilet. Yeah, absolutely.
And how old are they? I mean, this is from 11, is it? 11 upwards?
11, yeah, predominantly 11 to 16. Okay. And I know my daughter now can go all day without going to the loo because she's trained herself. She's had to.
Well, I wonder if a teacher would turn around and say, you see, the policy works.
My concern is that bad for her health, though?
It's not good in many ways. And do you speak to other parents about it? Can you give me an idea of how the parents feel about the industrial action?
Yeah, I think the parents really feel it's necessary. I don't think the parents are feeling that. I don't think the parents are feeling that anything's changing really at the moment. So they keep obviously fighting back. I know there's many teachers there as well that are actually forced to teach in certain ways that they don't agree with. And that is why there's been striking, not general national striking, but there's been additional striking on that basis from teachers and parents as well.
It is remarkable that, I'm sure there are some parents and some teachers who are fully on board with it all, and they're welcome to ring me as well. But it does seem remarkable that enough teachers to propel industrial action and enough parents to speak to the media, which you presumably don't do easily. It's not something you would have wanted to do when you woke up this morning, but you feel strongly enough about it. And Anglia TV down in Cambridgeshire has reported on it as well, are of one view. And then it's the school management. So it's not the common room, it's above the common room is of another view. And they're so committed to that view that they will press on regardless of what everybody else is saying.
Absolutely. I think that with the rules getting harder, we're seeing the opposite of what they're trying to achieve. We're seeing a daughter's behaviour worsen, not get better.
And whose benefit is that? Who benefits from that? Nobody at all. Well, I hope she's, you probably need to get her diagnosis sorted first, don't you?
It's all in hand, yes.
It is good.
We're getting there.
Yeah, where the wheels turn incredibly slowly, don't they? But it is worth sticking with it, as I'm sure you know. And then it puts the school in it puts you in a much stronger position when you're dealing with the school about what is and what is not appropriate behaviour for your daughter. But this is incredible. Is it one head? You might not want to answer this question, but is it like one head who is driving all of this? Or
I think predominantly, yes. Having said
where
that,
else it comes from.
They're obviously supported by, I dare say, some of the staff members. Many are leaving, and I think they're possibly being seen to be bringing in their own people.
Yeah, okay.
That's happening too.
You just sort of unhappy children. Surely are not going to be happy students, but there it is. Mere good luck. 12:30 is the time. Amelia Cox has your headlines. How strict is too strict? And what can you do if your children are at a school where you feel that the rules are too strict, the processes are too draconian? I love that word. Answer: doesn't seem like you can do an awful lot. What can you do if you're a teacher? I'd love to hear from a teacher in a school where you think the policies are excessive. Because there's a school in Cambridgeshire where they're going on strike. It's where our last daughter's caller goes. And quite a few of you pointing out that toilet breaks could actually be linked to the menstrual cycle as well, which would be a cause for concern. I should probably read out what the school has said, not in response to any of these specific points, but just generally speaking. Saying Ivo will open as normal on strike days, and we will do everything we can to ensure our students experience as little disruption as possible. Then we believe that there were 3 remaining issues of contention covering staff development, a dress code for staff, and limiting the number of after-school meetings to 1 per week. So nothing there at all about the rules that the children are expected to obey, which may or may not be pertinent. Andy's in Wickham. Andy, what would you like to say?
Yeah, whenever you do subjects around behaviour, I'm always keen to call in, but I'm more often on the road or busy with work. I think these kind of measures are out of fear and humiliation, and all of the responsibility is on the children.
Yeah.
None of it is on the teachers. And it's lazy. It's really, really, really lazy, because what you need to do is you need to look at the reasons why a child is behaving a certain way. And all behaviour, for all of us, is communication. So what is it they're trying to communicate? But it's so much easier to just put all the emphasis on the kids and rule through fear and humiliation than actually to take the time. And what I do when I do my work is I go in and I don't look at the child's behaviour. I don't look at the child. I always, in the first instance, it's all about, right, environment, communication, social interaction. What is it that you're doing or not doing that's contributing to this child's behaviour? And the problem that we've got, when we've got a government that behave the way they do, I go into places and it's very institutionalised, and trying to get to change the behaviour of the school and the people within it, if they've got people at the top that want to run it that way because they're under pressure or they feel that's the right way of doing it, it's really hard. But the power dynamic is all with the teachers, none of it with the children. So they have no control over changing the environment that will help change their behaviour. So they're relying upon the adults.
Yeah, I love that. That's really helpful. It focuses, and quite correctly, Andy, on children who are, what would the word be? What word would you use if I was going to say disruptive? What word would you use?
That children are communicating something.
No, I know that, but just the descriptor for the kind of children that you would be focusing on, because you're not, for example, not bringing a pen to class by accident is not really communicating anything, is it?
Well, it might be. It might be, because there might be stuff going on in school.
But this is but this is the point. This is the point about an arbitrary rule. So I quite often forget pens. I'll go downstairs to do a full disclosure interview, and I've forgotten a pen, and I'm categorically not communicating anything to anybody. So it's ridiculous that I should be punished for that. Yeah. Let alone challenged. So that's just the distinction I'm trying to draw, is between a behaviour that does have deeper roots than we might initially realise. But then the really stupid rules are the ones that are punishing people for completely innocuous oversight, surely.
But why? But the thing is, what I would look at is, why do they feel the need to have those rules in place?
Same here. I would look at that as well. What answers do you find? What answers do you find?
The answers you find is that I always come back to, it's a lazy way of managing behaviour. It's a lazy way of doing it, because it is all down to fear and humiliation, and not at any point looking at what is it that we can do differently that will reduce children forgetting bringing their pens to school. It's all on the child.
Well, you don't have to do. You don't have to do anything really, because you can just sort of cop out, can't you? Like a robot, you can say, no, sorry, that's the rule. So it's a bit computer says no. It's turning teachers into completely unengaged automator.
What I do see a lot when I go into schools is I see teachers that are so under pressure to tick the box of the curriculum.
Yes.
That what they do is they become blinkered about what else is going on around them. And I work with children with learning disabilities. It was really, really interesting listening to that lady just before.
Yeah.
You know, and so the children I work with are often non-verbal, and they certainly are. All their communication is impaired. But all of it is down to their behaviour, and you recognising the behaviour and what they're trying to communicate with that behaviour. But if you're blinkered, trying to get a child to complete a sum and not seeing what's going on around you, and then through their behaviour in their face and their body, and the draconian measures that I see is physical intervention. It's physical intervention, and schools resorting to physical intervention too soon and too often because they have no other measures in place proactively to be able to prevent the behaviour that then requires that.
I get it. Is are things getting? I don't know if better or worse are quite the right terms to use. But are you encountering more tales of unjustifiable strictness?
I'm in many meetings now. We are in a perfect storm. Education. I work for health and social care are all on their knees. Now, I've done this job since 91, and I've seen one or two of those three services struggling, and the other one propped it up. All three are on their knees, and I am receiving referrals, countless. I'm firefighting. I'm struggling to do functional analysis and functional assessment because I'm firefighting, because all of this is not in place. And I believe it's because we've had 13 years of literally nothing. And COVID exposed it, because what we had is, and Brexit, so we had all of the people that prepared to work for low wage in high skilled jobs, which is care, which is the TAs in, support staff in schools and and band 4 nurses and stuff. They've all gone. And then what's happened is COVID has just stripped away a lot of the support services that were available. There was a small amount, but they were good. So what we're doing now is we're getting the fallout of all of that. And so then the parents' resilience to be able to manage through the red tape and the processes to get their child a diagnosis, to get in the right school, is depleted. So there's nobody at the moment. It's frustrating doing this job at the moment, because...
Well, I bet it is, because you feel a bit impotent, you feel powerless. What can a parent do? Well, I mean, shy of being lucky enough to engage the support or enlist the support of someone like you, but if a parent feels that the rules at their children's school are just wrong and deeply unfair, what can they do?
I think that that's a difficult question to answer in a short call on your radio show. Yeah. What I would say to
it's not that short,
philosophy, but no, of course, I appreciate that, and I'm grateful for having the opportunity to talk. What I would say to parents, we work off the theory called positive behaviour support, and that gives more detail about functions of behaviour. If they look at that will help inform how they present an argument to the teachers and to the school and whatever. That's the best bit of advice I can give in a short period of time.
No, thank you. I get it, and you've given people some reference points there to look up more as well. Thank you, Andy. It's a powerful testimony about the much bigger picture, of which this would be not an immediately obvious symptom, but the way you explained it makes it crystal clear. Thank you. John's in Abbey Wood. John, what would you like to say?
Hello, I'm a parent of a daughter. We're just going through the secondary school admissions process now. We just literally yesterday signed off on our preferences.
Right.
And in this area, there's numerous schools. None of them are faith-based. And going into that situation and sitting with the head and being in the assemblies and everything, it's all warmth and love and how we're going to nurture your child. All this is the support structure and everything like. Except for one school we went to where the headmistress, basically the principal, talked half an hour about how she was going to punish our child. Very specifics about...
Was she called Miss Trunchbull by any chance?
Well, I did wonder. I mean, I did ask after it. I'm from a family of educators,
right?
And I understand schools have different philosophies and structures and approaches to discipline and how they, get the best from your child. But this school is literally about how we're going to punish this talk. Sorry, this talk was about specifically how we're going to punish your child. Specifics like 5 stripes or more, then we're going to give them a detention on their tie. Wearing this, they have to wear that. They have to do this. There was posters everywhere about going into the classroom, sitting down, being quiet, being And I understand there's different philosophies, but this was literally that was all it was about. And to the extent I actually had to have a word with somebody afterwards. Well, I wasn't actually. I was on the phone to my dad saying, "You wouldn't believe what I've just heard." And one of the vice principals came up and said, "I'm in charge of curriculum." I said, "Why didn't you talk about curriculum? You had half an hour to talk about curriculum. You didn't do that. You simply talked about how you're going to punish our children." I looked around that room. And the children looked horrified. The headmistress actually opened with the line, "If you're not interested and you're not on board with what we do at this school, then you might as well leave." And a number of people, I tried to leave, but I couldn't because I was at the back of this PE hall. So it was a bit weird. I had to walk in front of her. But it was like it's.
It really knocked you back, this, didn't it?
It did.
And I mean, obviously, it's so fresh in your mind because it happened yesterday. That if we'd had this phone in a fortnight from now, you probably wouldn't be quite as animated as you are, but it really knocked you back, this.
It happened about 2 weeks ago, but it's still because my daughter goes to such an amazing school, an amazing primary school that has been amazing through the COVID. They were all the teachers. I met one of the teachers outside of school, and he said, "Yeah, it's an amazing school. All the teachers turned up to give out food parcels and everything like that." Now she's got this limited choice about where she goes to secondary schools. It really incensed me. And I have a reason. I have a theory about why they do it. Yes, there is probably in certain inner city schools, not really inner city school really, but approach to discipline and being strict is
crowd control
and all that. Essentially, yeah. But I think it's like an arms race. Yeah. I see the physical manifestation in terms of the blazer, this sort of fetishization about the school blazer and the school uniform. That up every year, that's all ups and ups. The cost of the uniform goes up and up. And I think with the discipline aspect of it, it's like how can we appeal to the lowest common denominator amongst parents to say, yeah, we're going to get the best out of school. It's all about discipline. It's easy, as your previous course.
That makes sense. It fits. I've got to crack on, mate, because I've got Noel Fitzpatrick waiting in the lobby, and I'm a little late for this. But I love that. I love the way your call from a parent sits with the last call as a behavioural expert, and both speaking towards this actually. So they sell it as a tough option. They sell it as a hard option. We're really strict. But actually, it's a soft option. It's the easy way out. To just say, right, do this, do that. And if you don't, it's a detention. If you don't, it's isolation, or as I might call it, ostracism. Infant ostracism. What do you do in your school if someone forgets a pencil? Infant ostracism. You call it that, it begins to feel a little bit different, doesn't it? Thank you. It's 12:47. 12:50 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Do you know, one of the stories that Dom Joly tells in his new book, one of the conspiracy theories he explores, is one I hadn't come across before, about the idea that Paul McCartney has been cloned. And some people in public life manage to do so much that I sometimes wonder whether they have been cloned. And my next guest, Noel Fitzpatrick, is indeed one of those people. I'll just run through a few, shall I, of the reasons why I think there might be several of you in a bunker somewhere in Surrey. World-renowned neuro-orthopedic veterinary surgeon, the founder of Fitzpatrick Referrals in Surrey, star of the TV show, Channel 4 TV show, The Supervet, writer of countless books, of the latest of which we'll talk about shortly, and also a bit like sort of Dolly Parton, almost constantly on tour.
Well, I was sleeping on your sofa just out in this there. Because I got 10 minutes. I thought, yippee, because I was doing surgery on a dachshund just before midnight last night. Yeah, because when the discs blow, the discs blow. Gosh. And you gotta be on it. So yeah, I don't really see it as work, James. And I was very interested in Arnold Schwarzenegger's interviews last week. That fascinates me because he doesn't see it as work either. And I guess, like him, coming from his background, I grew up on a farm. The cows need milking, and that's just how it is. You don't see it as work. And I've never seen what I do.
Because it's not optional. It's the rhythm of you've just got to do it.
And it's a way of life.
Yes, exactly.
So like he said, well, when he was in the gym, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was smiling because he was getting towards his goal. When I'm operating like I was last night, or when I'm tomorrow I drive to Wrexham to do a show, it's fine, because it's all about me trying to spread love in the world, me trying to kind of act as a conduit for all the love that I see between humans and animals, and it's not work. So I don't ascribe to the theory that I'm working hard. I'm just relaxing hard.
But so there is only one of you then?
There's only one. No, I haven't yet, although I would like to do the Sylvester Stallone Demolition Man, freezing myself for when the time is right and needed.
Come back when the world needs you now, mate. I don't think there's much doubt about that. But just before we talk about Kira and Me, the new book, what do people, tell people who've never been to one what your stage show is? What does it involve?
So the stage show is really important to me because we live in a world that's increasingly divided by politicians, by opinions, and by, I was saying to you before we came on air, what you said is people's association with the objective truth in an interview you did that I was fascinated by. And what I try to do on the show is translate the love that I see between an animal and a human, because a dog does not care if you are a prince or a pauper. Right. Literally doesn't care. So you come home, you could be the leading president in the world, or Arnold Schwarzenegger, or a dustbin man, or a guy working in a shop, or whatever, or a vet. Your dog doesn't care. Licks you in the face just the same. So dogs treat us all as equal. And the tour is a journey from my youth through my love of Led Zeppelin, trying to pretend to be Brian May with a hay bale guitar, trying to play guitar extremely badly, which is worth the ticket price on its own, right through loads of stories, up and down, ins and outs, a little bit of tears, a little bit of laughter, through to meeting the Queen, and I had a lovely time with her, and she was extremely funny, through to my dad dancing to Harry Styles in Act 2, right through to saving the planet, the rhinoceroses and the tigers at the end of Act 2, when we introduce Kira and Me, which we're going to do now. That's the tour.
And Kira and Me is the tale, really, of your life with your border terrier, who you lost, I think, in 2021. People who know you, people who follow you, will already feel that they know her.
Yes, I hope so. Yeah, she was the love of my life and my best friend in the whole wide world, bar none. And with your best friend, if that love is unconditional, that's an extraordinary thing. It elevates you as a human being, because you don't need clothes on. You don't need to assume the persona of Professor Noel Fitzpatrick or whoever you think you are in your egotistical delusion. She was just a bristly ball of unbridled joy, an electrical current that radiated love out into the world. And you know what? Even more than that, if you plugged into her socket, all your problems absorbed away. So she was a two-way circuit. She took all the pain away and gave all the joy out. And I say in the book that she came from stardust and returns to stardust like us all. And she's still inside me in stardust. And this book is our journey and the things she's taught me along the way.
And it's an extraordinary book, beautifully illustrated, we should say, by Laura McKendry. Where did it come from? What were you thinking when you thought, I know what I want to put down next? What was it?
That's a great question, James. Thank you. And thank you for reading it. And yes, respect to Laura for illustrating it so well. It came in a single day. 80% of that book was written like a song.
Yes, it reads like that, doesn't it? Or a poem. Right?
You know, you ask Noel Gallagher, where does Wonderwall come from? You know, he goes, I don't know, mate. It just came out of the sky. This came out of the sky. I woke up crying Christmas morning 2022. Mammy had died. Kira had died. I'd had significant financial difficulties and lost one of my hospitals. And I had my head in the pillow. I didn't want to get out of bed. And she seemed to talk to me. She seemed to tell me, it's okay. It's all right, Daddy. If you keep doing what you're doing, it'll be okay. I purposely have brought the book in with one page open, and I'm going to read 4 lines if you don't mind, because it represents the center of the book. And it says, hugging is half of healing. If fear can drive us rather than destroy us, the thing we fear the most can make us least afraid. And to me, the book hinges around the love of a human, the love of your mother, your father, your children, the love of any being in the world that can elevate you to a truer sense of your own humanity.
So that's Yeah, that's important because it's a book about love.
It's a book about...
In any form, actually.
Yes.
You just focus on this one form, this one relationship to approach universal truths.
Universal love that we all seek. You know, if a person doesn't seek love, hope and redemption, then I think that is what's wrong with the world. We're not seeking love, hope and redemption. And I don't even need the book in front of me to say the last line, and when night's pillow nuzzles back the day, the only light you get to keep is the love you gave away. And I wish the world would receive that message. There's a bit in the book where, why are people cruel? And she asks me, a car splashes us in the rain, covers up us with water. And she goes, oh, that was cruel. No, I go, that was cruel. And she goes, what is cruel? And I said, well, it's the opposite of kind. And she said, is it harder to be kind? And I go, well, no, it's easier to be kind. And she goes, well, why isn't everybody kind then? So that's the kind of book it is. It's uplifting, and it's supposed to be an antidote to man's inhumanity to man and all of that stuff that's going around.
Of
that
course.
I would love her light to help the world.
It's an innocence as well, isn't it? It speaks. It's almost a conversation between innocence and experience, which has all sorts of...
Well, you too would be very proud of that, Bono. Innocence and
we
experience.
know how you feel about that.
But yes, it very much is, and I hope it brings out the innocence and the childlike love in everybody.
There's a love. Finally, there's a lovely bit when you talk about ownership and who owns who.
Yes, that's my favourite. It's my favourite sketch in the book from Laura. She captures where Kira is trying to run up a tree pretending to be a squirrel. And she asks me, do the birds and the bees think they're different to the squirrel or whatever? And I say, well, actually, come to think of it, they probably don't see those differences. And to your point, if we don't see those differences between each other, we can actually observe that there is a universal kind of love linking us. And when you came into the question, what was inside your heart? What was your reason for asking that, James? Tell me what you felt when you saw that.
About the ownership?
Yes.
Well, I don't know. I just felt something inside me shift a bit. Something about... I mean, we... a dog at home, and I think about them in different ways when I'm reading your stuff. So I think it was about responsibility, probably.
So the point of all of that is that we're all the same. We all have blood running through our veins, and I don't believe we have ownership of love. And she goes, when you named me Kira, does that mean you own me? And I said, well, no, it doesn't. We're just companions on the journey. And she just says, well, tomorrow is a better day because you're in it. And that's not ownership. That's unconditional love, and that's what the book's about. Thanks, James.
Tomorrow is a better day because you're in it. Kira and Me by Noel Fitzpatrick and illustrated by Laura McKendry is out now.
Thank you, James.
It's always good to see you. And I must say, one of my all-time favourite episodes of Full Disclosure with Noel is obviously still available on Global Player if you want to find out a little bit more about this fascinating and very busy but not hard-working man. That's it from me. It's just gone 1 o'clock. That's it from me for today. If you missed any of today's show, you can, of course, listen back on Global Player, where you're always in control. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty is with you now. 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 Sheila Fogarty is with